Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay. So I've never really shared this with anyone before, not in full detail, because honestly, most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. But it's been weighing on me for years, and I figure if I don't get it out somewhere, it'll just eat away at me forever. This happened back in November of 1995, when I was a college student in Boulder, Colorado. I was going through a rough patch. Exams were piling up, and I felt like the walls of my dorm were closing in on me. You know how it is, that kind of stress where your chest feels tight all the time and you just need to get away, even for a little while. That night, I decided to go for a hike in Chiaqua Park. It wasn't something I did often, especially not alone after dark, but I'd been there a few times during the day, and it felt familiar enough. The park is up in the hills, with trails that wind through dense trees and open up to these amazing views of the city below. I figured the quiet and the cold air might help clear my head. I threw on a heavy jacket, some old jeans, and my hiking boots, the ones with the worn-out soles that I probably should have replaced, grabbed a small backpack with a water bottle and a flashlight, and headed out around 8 o'clock. The sky was completely overcast, no stars or moon, just this thick blanket of clouds that made everything feel heavier. Below, the city lights of Boulder glowed in this hazy orange way, like a distant fire, but up there, it was dark and isolated. I started on the main trail, the one that leads up to a ridge where you can see for miles. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off rocks and tree trunks, and every little sound made me jump. The crunch of my own boots on gravel, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was cold, not freezing, but that damp chill that seeps into your bones, and I could see my breath fogging up in the beam of light. I remember thinking how stupid this was, hiking alone at night, but I was so wound up from studying that I didn't care. I just kept walking, trying to focus on the rhythm of my steps, the way my muscles were starting to ache a little, anything to push away the anxiety. After about 20 minutes, I left the main trail and took a narrower path that loops around the back of the park. This part was less maintained, with overgrown bushes and fallen branches, and the trees closed in overhead, blocking out even the faint glow from the city. It was quieter here too, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I slowed down, my flashlight sweeping side to side, and I started to notice little things, the way the shadows seemed to move on their own, or how the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. My heart was already beating faster, not from exertion, but from this low-level dread that was building in my gut. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the stress get to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I heard it, a soft rustling in the grass to my left, maybe 30 meters away. At first I thought it was an animal like a deer or a raccoon, something common in the area. I stopped dead in my tracks, my flashlight pointing toward the sound. The beam shook a little because my hands were trembling, and I held my breath, listening. The rustling got louder, more deliberate, like something big was moving through the underbrush. I took a step closer, my boots squelching in the damp soil. And that's when I saw it. Silhouetted against the faint light from the city below was this massive, hairy figure. It was standing upright, taller than any person I'd ever seen, with these broad, hunched shoulders and arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its head was shaped weirdly, like a bullet or something, pointed at the top, and it was covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the dim light. I couldn't make out any facial features, just this shadowy outline, but I knew instantly it wasn't human. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear, but bears don't stand like that, and this thing was too lanky, too upright. My stomach dropped, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. I was frozen, absolutely paralyzed, like my feet were glued to the ground. All I could do was stare, and for a second, I thought it hadn't noticed me. But then it turned its head slightly, and I felt its eyes on me. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like this wave of pure terror washed over me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my legs felt weak, like they might give out any second. I was afraid to move, afraid to even breathe, because I was sure if I made a sound, it would charge at me. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot, but I always dismissed them as nonsense, until that moment. This thing was real, and it was right there, looking at me. I could see the way its shoulders moved as it shifted its weight, and I heard a low, guttural sound, almost like a grunt, but it was too quiet to be sure. The air around us felt charged, electric, like before a storm, and I could smell this musky, earthy scent, like wet fur and dirt, that made my nose wrinkle. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at each other. I was praying it would go away, that it would just ignore me and move on. But part of me was convinced I was about to die right there on that trail. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was hyper-aware of everything. The cold seeping through my jacket, the way my fingers were gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles hurt, the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, without warning, it moved. It didn't run or charge. It sort of loped away with this hunched, unnatural gait that was both graceful and unsettling. Its arms swung as it moved, and it covered ground incredibly fast, disappearing behind a cluster of trees in what seemed like seconds. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, like it had melted into the shadows. As soon as it was out of sight, the spell broke and I could move again. I didn't think twice. I turned and bolted back down the trail, my flashlight beam jerking wildly as I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop to see if it was following me. My lungs burned from the cold air, and my legs felt like rubber, but I pushed myself harder, stumbling over roots and rocks, my backpack bouncing against my back. Every noise, the wind in the trees, the crunch of my own footsteps, made me flinch. And I kept expecting to feel a hand grab me from behind. I was so scared I was crying, tears mixing with the sweat on my face, and I couldn't get the image of that thing out of my head. Its broad shoulders, the way it moved, that bullet-shaped head. It was burned into my mind. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot at the base of the trail where my car was parked. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open, and I slammed it shut, locking it immediately. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to calm down, but my heart was still racing. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see it standing there, watching me, but the parking lot was empty, just the faint glow of the city in the distance. I started the car and drove back to campus, my mind racing the whole way. What had I seen? Was it really Bigfoot? I'd never believed in that stuff, but there was no other explanation that made sense. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a costume. It was too big, too real. When I got back to my dorm, I didn't tell anyone. I just went to my room and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. I felt numb, disconnected, like I'd stepped into some other reality and couldn't find my way back. For days afterward, I was jumpy, starting at every noise, and I couldn't sleep without dreaming about that figure in the dark. I never went back to Shiakwa Park, not even during the day. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my stressed-out mind playing tricks on me, but I knew deep down that wasn't true. I'd seen it, felt its presence, and that moment of eye contact left me deeply unsettled, like it had seen right through me. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that night. I've never seen anything like it again, and I've never found any proof or heard of similar sightings in the area, which makes it even weirder. Part of me wishes I'd investigated, taken a photo or something, but I was too scared, and I think that fear probably saved me. Whatever it was, it didn't want to hurt me. It just left. But I'll never forget the terror of those few seconds when our eyes met, and that's it, really. I don't have any answers, just this memory that haunts me, and I guess I always will. Story 2. Okay, so this happened back in 1974. I was camping by myself on South Mountain in Burke County, North Carolina. I'd been coming up there for years, ever since I was a kid, but this time was different. I needed some space, Life had been piling up, work stuff, family things, and I just wanted to get away for a couple of days. So I packed my gear, grabbed my dog, a big mutt named Duke, and headed out early that morning. By the time I found a spot near a little stream, the sun was starting to dip, but I got the tent up and a fire going without any trouble. The place was beautiful, really peaceful. The stream bubbled along, and the trees were thick and green, smelling like pine and damp earth. I remember sitting by the fire after I'd eaten some beans and sausage from my skillet, just watching the flames and feeling the warmth on my face. Duke was lying next to me, his head on his paws, dozing off. Everything was calm, the kind of quiet that makes you forget about the world for a while. Twilight had settled in, and the sky was turning that deep blue-purple color, with the first stars starting to peek out. I was just relaxing, thinking about nothing in particular, when Duke suddenly lifted his head. He didn't just perk up, it was like he'd been jolted awake. His ears went straight back, and he let out this sharp, high-pitched bark that cut through the silence. Then he whined, this low, scared sound I'd never heard from him before, and he curled up tight against my leg, shaking. I mean, Duke was a tough dog. He'd faced down raccoons and even a coyote once without backing down. So this immediately put me on edge. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, and I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. I stood up slowly, my hand going to my Winchester .3030 leaning against a log nearby. I scanned the tree line across the stream, my eyes straining in the fading light. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows and leaves moving in the breeze. But then something caught my eye near the water's edge. It was dark and hunched over, like it was crouched down, and I thought maybe it was a bear or a deer. I've seen plenty of both out here, so I wasn't too worried yet, just cautious. But then it straightened up, and that's when my blood ran cold. This thing was huge. I mean massive. I'm 6'2", and this thing towered over me, easily 7 feet tall or more. It had no neck to speak of. Its head seemed to sit right on its shoulders, which were wide and powerful looking. Its arms were thick, like telephone poles, and they swung down past its knees as it moved. The whole body was covered in dark, matted hair, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was built like a man, but way bigger and more muscular, and it moved with this eerie grace that didn't fit its size. Then the smell hit me. It was this overwhelming stench of rot and wet animal, like something had died and been left in the rain for days. It made my stomach churn, and I had to fight back the urge to gag. Duke was whining louder now, pressing himself into my legs so hard I could feel his trembling. The creature let out a low growl that started deep in its chest and then rose into this howling whistle, a sound I can't even describe properly. It was part scream, part wind through trees, and it froze me right where I stood. My fingers were numb, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool evening air. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring at each other. It felt like hours, but it was probably only seconds. Its eyes, I couldn't see them clearly in the dim light, but I got the impression they were dark and focused right on me. It was sizing me up, I could tell, and I felt this primal fear wash over me, like I was prey. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't have arms that long. A man in a suit? That thought crossed my mind, but it moved too naturally, too fluidly, and the smell was too real. Without thinking, I raised my Winchester and fired a shot into the air. I wasn't aiming to hit it. I just wanted to scare it off. The crack of the rifle echoed through the woods, and for a second, everything went silent. Then the creature let out another howl, louder and sharper this time, like it was angry. It turned and vanished into the trees with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that big. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, just the rustling of leaves fading into the distance. I stood there, shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Duke was still glued to my side, his whines turning into soft whimpers. The smell lingered, that awful rot smell, and I could still hear that whistle echoing in my ears. I lowered the rifle, my hands trembling so bad I almost dropped it. I kept scanning the trees, expecting it to come back, but nothing moved. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like everything had fled or was hiding. I forced myself to sit down by the fire, but I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me jump. A twig snapping, the fire crackling. Duke wouldn't leave my side. He kept looking toward where the creature had been, his ears twitching. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a bear, but I knew it wasn't. I'd seen bears up close, and this was different. This thing had an intelligence to it, a presence that felt ancient and wild. That's when I started thinking about the stories I'd heard growing up around here. Folks talked about the hairy man, or woolly booger, something that lived deep in the mountains and only came out at night. I'd always dismissed it as superstition, but now it didn't seem so far-fetched. I remembered a couple of times years before, when I'd been hunting with my dad, we'd seen something moving in the distance, big and dark, too fast to identify. We'd chalked it up to a bear or a trick of the light. But now I wondered, had it been watching me all along? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I stayed by the fire for what felt like forever, just staring into the flames and listening. My heart wouldn't slow down, and my skin felt crawly like I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back from the trees. The night air grew colder, and I threw more wood on the fire, needing the light and warmth. Duke eventually settled down a bit, but he'd still let out a low growl every now and then, his eyes fixed on the same spot. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but it was full dark by now, and the trail back was rough. I didn't trust myself to navigate it without falling or getting lost, especially with my nerves shot, so I decided to wait it out until morning. I moved my sleeping bag closer to the fire and kept my Winchester within arm's reach. I didn't sleep a wink, just sat there, jumping at every noise. The hours dragged on, and the memory of that creature kept replaying in my mind. The way it stood, the smell, that whistle, it was burned into me. As the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I felt a little relief, but the fear was still there, deep in my gut. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands still shaking. Duke stayed close, his tail between his legs. Before I left, I took one last look around the campsite. Everything was quiet and still, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. The imprint of where it had stood was faint in the soft ground near the stream, and the smell was mostly gone, but I could still catch a whiff of it if I breathed deep. I hiked out of there as fast as I could, not looking back. The whole way down the mountain, I felt like I was being followed, but whenever I turned, there was nothing there. When I got to my truck, I threw my gear in the back and drove off, not stopping until I was back on paved roads. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Who would believe me? But it stuck with me all these years. That creature, whatever it was, changed something in me. I used to love the wilderness, but now I get uneasy when I'm alone in the woods, especially at dusk. I still go camping, but never alone, and always with a rifle handy. The thing is, I can't explain it. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a man. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. But I saw it with my own eyes. And that look it gave me, like it knew me, like it was assessing me. That's what haunts me the most. To this day, I'll sometimes wake up in the middle of the night hearing that whistle in my dreams, and I'll feel that same cold fear all over again. It's like a part of me is still there, frozen by that stream, waiting for it to come back. Story 3. All right, I've been sitting on this for, well, decades now. I've never typed it out, never told anyone outside my family. But seeing some of the stories on here and that recent footage from up in Washington, it's like a key turned in a lock in my head. It all came flooding back. My name is Shannon Morgan, and this happened to me when I was about 10 or 11 years old. We lived outside of Eureka, California, on Old Hanson Road. It was the kind of place where your backyard was just the edge of the woods, and the woods went on forever. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that feels endless when you're a kid. My brother, who's 15 months older than me, and our friend from down the road, a kid my age, decided to go fishing. We had this little creek that ran behind our house, not more than a 10-minute walk. We grabbed our fishing poles, the cheap kid ones with the plastic reels, and a jar of dirt for worms we dug up. We weren't serious fishermen, it was just something to do. We fished for a little while at our usual spot, but the creek was shallow and we weren't catching anything, just minnows. We got bored, like kids do, and started wandering further along the bank than we were supposed to. Our parents always said not to go too far, but you know how it is. The woods were just there, and they called to you. That's when we found it. An old logging road, almost completely swallowed up by the forest. You wouldn't even see it if you weren't looking right at it. It was just a narrow gap in the trees, the ground packed hard, but covered in a carpet of brown pine needles and ferns that had crept in from the sides. It was like finding a secret. We looked at each other, and without even saying anything, we knew we were going to follow it. We left our fishing poles by the creek. We'd just be a minute. The road went uphill, a steady, gentle slope. The air changed almost immediately. Down by the creek it was sunny and warm, but in here, under the canopy of these huge redwoods and firs, it got cool and dim. The sunlight came down in little broken pieces, dappling the ground. It was quiet too, not a dead quiet, but the normal forest sounds. The chirping of birds, the rustle of a squirrel seemed muffled, like we were walking into a room with thick carpets. The air smelled damp, of rotting wood and wet earth. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes, just kicking at pine cones and talking about stupid kid stuff when we heard it. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a squirrel, it was a rustling, but heavy. From the other side of the road, in the thickest part of the woods. It was the sound of something big pushing its way through the undergrowth, not running, just moving. Branches were snapping, not little twigs, but the sound of stuff breaking under weight. We all stopped talking at once, froze. My brother held his arm out in front of me and our friend, like that was going to do anything. We just stood there in the middle of this old road, huddled together, our hearts starting to beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. We stared into the trees, trying to see what it was. A deer, maybe a bear. We knew there were black bears around, but this sounded bigger. The rustling kept coming, getting closer to the edge of the tree line. It was deliberate. Then the brush about 50 feet away from us just parted, and it stepped out. Not all the way. It stayed half in the shadows, one shoulder and its head visible, but that was enough. It was huge. I don't mean tall man huge. I mean it was built like a refrigerator, but taller than any person I'd ever seen. It had to be 7, 8 feet tall, easy. It was covered in hair, but not like a bear's fur. This was long, shaggy hair, dark brown, almost black, and it was matted in places. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. I didn't get a perfect look at its face because it was partly hidden, but I saw its profile. It had a heavy brow, and its head was kind of cone-shaped. It just stood there looking at us. It wasn't making a sound anymore. No growl, no huff. It was just watching. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was curious. The fear that went through me was like nothing I've ever felt before or since. It was a cold electric jolt that went from the top of my head down to my feet, freezing me in place for a second. It wasn't just fear of an animal. It was a deeper, primal terror. This thing was wrong. It didn't belong in my world. My brother was the one who broke the spell. He didn't yell, "Run," or anything. He just made this choked sound in his throat, grabbed my arm, and yanked. That was all it took. We spun around and we ran. We ran back down that logging road like our lives depended on it, and I truly, in that moment, believed they did. We were screaming, not words, just high-pitched, panicked shrieks. The sound of our own frantic breathing and our pounding feet on the hard-packed dirt was deafening, and then we heard it moving again. It was keeping pace with us, not on the road, but in the trees to our left, the same side it had come from. We could hear the crashing, the snapping of branches, the heavy, rhythmic thuds of its footsteps. It was fast, unbelievably fast. It wasn't just running alongside us. It was moving through thick brush like it was nothing, and it was keeping up with 3 terrified kids sprinting down an open path. I risked a glance over my shoulder, my neck stiff with fear. I didn't see it clearly, just a massive dark shape flowing through the trees, a blur of movement that was always just behind a trunk or a thicket. The hair on my arms stood up. It was herding us or hunting us. Then it did something that made my blood turn to ice water. The crashing sound stopped ahead of us. We kept running, our legs burning, our chests heaving, and then about 100 feet down the road we saw it. It stepped out onto the road just for a second and stood there, blocking our way. It was fully visible now, and it was even bigger than I'd thought. It turned its head and looked right at us. Its eyes were dark, intelligent, not the eyes of a dumb animal. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it melted back into the woods on the other side of the road. We skidded to a halt, sobbing and gasping for air. We were trapped. It was in front of us. We couldn't go back. We stood there, clutching each other, waiting for it to come out and get us. The forest had gone silent again. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the blood pounding in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds, we heard the crashing start again, back behind us now, moving parallel to the road. It had circled around. It was playing with us, toying with us. The realization was worse than the initial sight of it. This thing wasn't just chasing us out of its territory. It was intelligent. It knew we were scared, and it was using that. We started running again, slower now because we were exhausted, and our fear was a heavy weight on our backs. Every few moments we'd hear it. It would stop ahead, and we'd see a branch move or catch a glimpse of dark fur, and then it would move again as we got closer. It never crossed the road again, but it was always there, just inside the tree line, pacing us, making sure we knew it was there. The smell hit me then, a smell I'd forgotten until now. It was a mix of things, wet dog but stronger, and a foul, musky scent, like a skunk but dirtier, and underneath it all, the coppery smell of old blood. It was a smell of the wild, of something that lived deep in the woods and killed things. The whole run back down that hill was a blur of pure, undiluted terror. My side had a stitch in it that felt like a knife. My friend was crying openly. My brother's face was pale and set, his eyes wide. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just ran, following the road, praying it would lead us back to the creek, back to something we knew. Then through the trees, I saw a break in the canopy. Sunlight. We were almost to the clearing where the Hansons' property started. Their old barn was just visible. We put on one last burst of speed, our legs screaming in protest. We burst out of the tree line and into the open field. The sun was blinding after the gloom of the woods. We didn't stop running until we were a good 50 yards into the field. Then we all collapsed onto the grass, heaving, our bodies shaking uncontrollably. The sounds had stopped. The crashing, the footsteps, the breaking branches. It all just ceased the second we left the woods. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn at the edge of the trees, and it wouldn't cross it. We lay there for a long time, catching our breath, our hearts slowly settling down from a gallop to a hard, painful thump. We sat up and looked back at the forest. It was just a line of trees again, quiet, normal. The afternoon sun shone on it peacefully. There was no sign of anything having been there, no sound, no movement. We didn't say a word to each other. We just got up, dusted ourselves off, and walked the rest of the way home in silence. We never went back for our fishing poles. We never talked about it with our friend again. When we got home, our mum asked why we were so dirty and out of breath. We just said we'd been playing tag. She didn't press. For years, I think I convinced myself it was a bear, a weird, giant bear that walked on two legs. It was easier to believe that. It let me sleep at night. Then, about 10 years ago, I was at my brother's house. We were adults by then. It was late, and we were watching some stupid cable show about Bigfoot. They showed a piece of grainy footage, the Patterson-Gimlin film. And when that figure walked across the screen with its long arms and that powerful, fluid gait, my brother went stiff beside me. He looked at me and his face was white. He said, "Shannon, that's what we saw, wasn't it?" I just nodded. I couldn't speak. The fear was back, fresh and cold, like it had happened yesterday. All those years of trying to explain it away just vanished. We saw what we saw. I didn't see a bear. We saw that. And it saw us, it followed us, it played with us, and then it just let us go. I still don't know why. I'll never know why, but sometimes, when the wind is right and I smell something dank and wild on the air, I remember that afternoon on the old logging road, and I feel like a 10-year-old girl again, terrified and small, with something ancient and powerful watching me from the shadows of the trees. Story 4. It was February 2015. I remember that month specifically because it was one of the coldest on record, the kind of cold that doesn't just nip at you, it settles deep in your bones and stays there. I was 36, living in Anchorage, and I'd been snowmobiling since I was a kid. It wasn't just a hobby, it was how I got around, how I checked my trap line, how I cleared my head. I knew the backcountry around Wasala Creek like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. That morning started like any other. I woke up before the sun, the inside of my windows covered in a thick rime of frost. The weather report said it was hovering around -30, but with the wind chill it was going to feel a lot worse. I didn't have to be at my job at the warehouse until the next afternoon, so I figured I'd make a solo run out to check my traps. My wife, she hated when I went out alone, especially in that kind of cold. We'd argued about it over coffee. She said it was irresponsible. I told her I'd been doing it for 20 years, that the machine was in perfect shape, that I had my kit, survival gear, a first aid pack, a satellite communicator, the whole deal. I kissed her on the forehead, told her I'd be back for dinner, and that was that. I remember the look in her eyes, a mix of worry and resignation. I should have listened. The ride out was normal. I geared up in my heavy insulated suit, my balaclava, my helmet. The snowmobile, a ski-doo expedition, started on the second pull, its two-stroke engine screaming into the silent pre-dawn dark. I followed the marked winter trail out of town, the headlight cutting a narrow cone through the blackness, the world reduced to this tunnel of light and the endless white on either side. The sky began to lighten into a dull, bruised grey as I got deeper in, the sun just a faint suggestion behind a blanket of thick cloud. The trees were heavy with snow, every spruce branch sagging under the weight. It was beautiful, peaceful, or it should have been. The trail near Wasala Creek winds through a lot of frozen muskeg. That's basically a big frozen swamp, before it climbs into denser spruce forest. I'd done this run 100 times. I knew where the trail got narrow, where the creek made a sharp bend, where the old moose carcass from last fall was slowly being reclaimed by the snow. But as I entered the thicker part of the forest, maybe an hour and a half into the ride, something felt off. I can't explain it any better than that. It was a feeling, a physical sensation that started as a little prickle at the back of my neck and just grew. The first thing I really noticed was the silence. Now, the woods in winter are quiet, but they're not dead silent. You usually hear things, the crunch of your own track, the whine of the engine, the wind sighing through the tops of the spruce trees. Sometimes you'll hear a raven or the creak of a tree. But this was different. This was a thick, heavy, oppressive silence. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. I remember throttling down to an idle, just listening. Nothing. Not a damn thing. Not even the wind. It was so quiet, I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. And that's when the other feeling hit me hard. The feeling of being watched. It's a cliché, I know, but it's a cliché because it's true. It's a primal thing. My chest got tight, like I was wearing a sweater that was 2 sizes too small. My breathing shallowed out. I found myself scanning the tree line, my head on a swivel, but I couldn't see anything, just the endless, monotonous wall of dark green spruce and white snow. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being stupid, letting the cold and the solitude get to me. I'd been out in worse conditions. I'd been alone for longer. This was nothing. I decided to push onto my first trap, a conibear set near a small clearing where I'd seen Martin sign a couple weeks back. I gunned the engine, the noise feeling obscenely loud in that absolute stillness. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. It intensified. It was a weight on my shoulders, a pair of eyes drilling into my back. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see another snowmobiler, a moose, anything. But there was nothing behind me except my own track, a deep blue scar in the snow. When I got to the clearing, I killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. I swung my leg off the sled, my boots crunching into the crust of the snow. The sound was tiny and isolated. I started walking toward where I'd set the trap, my eyes down, looking for the stake and the flagging tape. That's when I saw them. The tracks. They weren't moose tracks. They weren't bear tracks. Bears are hibernating in February. They weren't wolf tracks. I know what all those look like. These were different. They were huge. I mean, just massive. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold, and I just stared. They were human-like, bipedal, a left and a right, clear as day, heading from the tree line into the middle of the clearing, and then they just stopped, as if whatever made them had just stood here for a while. I pulled my glove off with my teeth, my fingers already going numb, and I laid my hand next to one of the prints. My hand looked like a child's. The track had to be at least 18 inches long, maybe more. The stride between them was enormous, like something taking giant, deliberate steps. My heart was hammering against my ribs now. This wasn't right. This wasn't anything I knew. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A person on foot, out here in -30, without snowshoes. The prints were sunk deep, showing immense weight. No person could have made these. I looked around, my head snapping left and right, the fear now a live wire in my gut. The clearing was empty, the tracks just ended in the middle, and that's when I heard it. A branch snap, not a little twig. This was a thick, wet, cracking sound, like a limb being broken over a knee. It came from the tree line directly across from me, maybe 50 yards away. I froze. I literally could not move. I was crouched there in the snow, one glove off, my hand freezing, staring into the dark wall of trees. My breath was coming in ragged white plumes. I could see my snowmobile, my ticket out of there, sitting 10 yards away. It felt like a mile. Then something moved. It was slow at first, a shifting of shadows between the trees. Then it stepped out. I stopped breathing. It was massive. It had to be over 8 feet tall, easily. It was covered in dark hair like a grizzly, but it was built like a man, a huge, powerfully built man. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. The head was conical, kind of peaked, and it was just looking at me. We stood there, frozen in that clearing, It was maybe 40 yards away. I could see steam, great gusts of it, billowing from its mouth and nose with each breath. Its breath. It was alive. It was real. The sheer size of it was staggering. It made the spruce trees around it look small. The terror that hit me then wasn't like any fear I'd ever felt. It wasn't the fear of crashing my sled or falling through ice. This was a deep, ancient, primal terror. It was the fear of prey. My bladder felt weak. My legs were trembling so hard I thought I'd collapse. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I was paralyzed. It took a step forward, then another. Its gait was smooth, powerful, those long legs covering ground with an easy, terrifying grace. It wasn't running, it was just advancing. Closing the distance, I finally broke. The spell shattered. I scrambled backwards, my boots slipping in the snow, falling onto my arse. I crab-walked backwards, my eyes locked on it, unable to look away. It was maybe 30 yards away now. I could see its eyes. Dark, deep-set and intelligent. There was no mistaking it. This thing was looking right at me, and it knew what I was. Then it made a sound. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder you feel in your chest more than you hear. Then it built into a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the air and straight through my body. It wasn't a bear's roar. It was lower, more complex, full of a raw, wild power that I can't even describe. The sound seemed to shake the snow from the branches nearby. My teeth rattled. As it roared, it swung one of those long, muscular arms out to the side. There was a young spruce tree, maybe 6 inches in diameter, standing next to it. Its hand, I couldn't see fingers. It was more like a dark mitt wrapped around the trunk, and it just snapped it. It didn't strain, it didn't grunt. It just snapped the damn tree in half like it was a dry twig. The crack was sharp and final, echoing the roar. That was the trigger, that display of pure, effortless strength. My flight response kicked into overdrive. I was on my feet, sprinting for the snowmobile. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was a frantic, panicked drum trying to beat its way out of my chest. I could hear it thudding in my ears, louder than anything. I didn't look back. I vaulted onto the seat, my fumbling, numb fingers scrambling for the key. It was still in the ignition. Thank God. I thumbed the starter. The engine whined, coughed, and then screamed to life. The sound was a blessed relief. I twisted the throttle, the track biting into the snow, and the sled lurched forward. That's when I dared a glance over my shoulder. It was coming after me. It wasn't running on all fours like a bear. It was running upright, its long legs eating up the ground with these huge bounding strides. Its arms pumped at its sides. The sheer speed of it was horrifying. It was fast, unbelievably fast. I pinned the throttle, the engine shrieking, the speedometer needle climbed, 20, 30, 40 miles an hour. I was flying across the clearing, heading for the trail I'd come in on. The wind tore at my helmet, screaming in my ears, and I could still hear it. Even over the roar of my own engine, I could hear the heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of its footfalls. It was keeping pace. It was right there. I could feel its presence, a monstrous shadow at my back. I didn't look again. I couldn't. I just focused on the trail ahead, my body crouched low over the handlebars, praying I wouldn't hit a drift and wipe out. I shot out of the clearing and back onto the narrow forest trail. The trees were a blur on either side. I was taking corners too fast, the sled skidding, my knees digging into the snow to keep it upright. I was sure I was going to crash. I was sure it was going to be on me the second I did. I don't know how long that chase lasted. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a minute, maybe 2. My whole world had shrunk to the tunnel of the trail, the scream of the engine, and the terrifying pounding rhythm of those footsteps behind me. Then, as suddenly as it started, the thudding stopped. I couldn't help myself. I risked a look back, slowing just a fraction. It was standing at the very edge of the clearing, right where the trees started. It had stopped. It was just standing there, watching me go. It was so far away already, just a dark, massive shape against the white snow. But I could still feel its eyes on me. I could feel its attention. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I pinned the throttle again and didn't let up. I flew down that trail, through the muskeg, back toward the more familiar territory. I didn't slow down until my skis hit the gravel of the main highway, the sound a jarring racket after the silence of the snow. I pulled over to the shoulder, killed the engine, and just sat there shaking. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even get my helmet off. My whole body was trembling, racked with violent, uncontrollable shivers. I was gasping for air, my throat raw from the cold and from panic. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just trying to get my breathing under control, staring back down the trail I'd just come from. It was empty, quiet, normal. I never went back to check those traps. I never went on another solo trip into that area. I told my wife I'd had engine trouble and turned back early. I never told anyone the whole story, not even her. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what followed me, the memory of its size, its speed, that deep vibrating roar, and the casual, terrifying power it took to snap that tree. It's burned into me. It left me with this profound feeling of vulnerability I'd never known before. Out there in all that open snow, I wasn't the experienced outdoorsman. I was just meat, and something out there knew it. Story 5. It was November of 1997, and I was driving home from a long day at work. I'm an electrician, and I'd been wiring up a new cabin way out past Cascade, which is a little blip on the map west of Manitou Springs. The job ran late, and the sky had been this bruised, heavy gray all afternoon. You could feel the snow coming, that kind of cold that gets right into your bones. By the time I packed my tools into my old Ford pickup, big, fat flakes were already starting to fall. I was on State Highway 24, heading east back towards Colorado Springs. It's a two-lane road that winds through the mountains, with steep embankments and thick stands of pine and aspen on either side. In good weather, it's a beautiful drive. That night, it was turning into a skating rink. The snow was coming down hard, a real whiteout, and the wind was starting to whip it into drifts across the asphalt. I had my high beams on, but they just lit up a tunnel of swirling white, and I was hunched over the wheel, peering through the windshield, trying to follow the taillights of the car in front of me. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tight. I remember the exact moment everything stopped. The red taillights ahead of me suddenly got brighter, and then they just stayed there. I pressed my brakes gently, feeling the tires slip a little before they caught. We were on a slight incline, and up ahead I could see a chain of red lights stretching around a bend. A line of cars, all stopped dead. My first thought was an accident. My second thought was that we were all screwed. In a storm like that, on a road like that, getting stuck could mean being there for hours. I turned down the radio, some classic rock station, and just listened. The wind howled outside, a low moaning sound. The engine ticked as it cooled. I could see my own breath inside the cab. I sat there for what felt like 20 minutes, but it was probably only 5 or 6. Nothing moved, not an inch. I saw a few other people getting out of their cars up ahead, their figures dark and hunched against the storm, just standing there looking forward. I figured I should see what was going on. Maybe I could help, or at least find out how long we were going to be there. I pulled my coat collar up, zipped it all the way, and shoved my door open against the wind. The cold hit me like a physical wall. It was the kind of cold that steals your breath and makes your eyes water instantly. The snow was already a good 3 or 4 inches deep on the road, and it was coming down so thick I could barely see 50 feet. I trudged forward a little, my boots crunching in the fresh powder. A few people were gathered near the front of the line, talking in low, tense voices. I didn't join them. I just stood by the side of my truck, looking up the road, trying to see past the curve. That's when I noticed the woman. She was standing by a beat-up sedan a few cars ahead of me. She wasn't looking at the road. She was turned completely away from the line of traffic, staring up at the ridge to the south of the highway. She had one hand shielding her eyes from the snow, and the other was pointing, her arms stiff, Her finger aimed straight up at the tree line. I followed her gaze. The ridge was probably 200 feet above us, a steep, rocky slope covered in dark pines. The snow made everything monochrome. White ground, grey sky, black trees, and standing there right on the edge of the tree line was a figure. My brain didn't process it right away. It was just a dark shape. I thought it was a tree stump or a weird rock formation. But then I realized it was moving, or not moving, but it was upright. It was tall, really tall, and it was just standing there, looking down at us. A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the weather started in my gut and spread outwards. This wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This was different. It was built like a man, but huge. It was covered in dark hair, like a thick, shaggy coat. But this was its own fur or skin. The snow made it stand out starkly against the backdrop of the trees. It was just this massive, dark, hairy thing, perfectly still, just watching. It was the silence of it that got me first. The whole world was loud with the wind and the muffled quiet of the snow, but this thing was a pocket of absolute stillness. It wasn't shifting its weight, it wasn't pawing at the ground, it was a statue, a sentinel. I felt my heart start to hammer against my ribs, a hard, frantic rhythm. My mouth went dry. I couldn't look away. I just stood there, frozen in place, my own breath pluming in the air, my feet going numb in my boots. I became hyper-aware of everything, the sting of the snow on my face, the rough texture of my coat sleeve under my fingers, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I glanced at the woman. She was still pointing, but her hand was trembling. She looked back at me, and our eyes met for a second. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a kind of terrified recognition. She knew this wasn't normal. She knew this was wrong. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, then back up at the ridge. And then she slowly lowered her hand, like she was afraid the motion would attract its attention. I looked back up. It was still there. I could make out more details now, even through the blowing snow. It had broad, powerful shoulders. Its arms were long, hanging down by its sides. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was just a darker patch in the mass of its head. But I just knew it was looking right at the line of cars, right at us. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't roar or beat its chest. It didn't move at all. But its awareness was a physical thing. It felt like a pressure in the air, a weight. It knew we were there. It was studying us, trapped, helpless, in our little metal boxes on the icy road. Someone further up the line shouted something, their voice thin and torn by the wind. I think they saw it too. The mood changed instantly. The low murmur of conversation from the other drivers died out. An eerie quiet fell over our little stranded group, broken only by the wind. It was a silence full of dread. You could feel the fear spreading, a contagion. People were getting back into their cars, slamming their doors, the sounds sharp and final in the muffled landscape. I should have gotten back in my truck. That's what my rational mind was screaming at me to do. Get in the truck. Lock the doors. But I was rooted to the spot. I couldn't stop staring. I was trying to memorize it, to burn the image into my brain, because a part of me knew no one would ever believe me. I remember thinking stupid, mundane thoughts, the kind your brain comes up with when it's short-circuiting. How is it not cold? It had to be freezing up there, exposed on the ridge, with just that dark fur. What is it doing here? This was a highway, not some remote wilderness trail. Then it moved. It wasn't a sudden, jerky movement. It was fluid and deliberate. It turned its head, just slightly. I still couldn't see its face, but I felt the focus of its gaze shift, scanning along the line of vehicles. It was taking inventory. That's what it felt like we were specimens. My bladder felt tight, my legs were shaking, the cold was seeping through my jeans, but the fear was a much deeper cold, an ice in my veins. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only another minute, it took a step. It didn't walk like a man. It was more of a lumbering, powerful stride. It moved from the open, rocky edge of the ridge and into the tree line. The dark pines swallowed it up in 2, 3 steps. One moment it was there, a stark, impossible silhouette against the snow, and the next it was just gone. I kept staring at the spot where it had been. My eyes were straining, trying to pick out any movement in the trees. Nothing. The ridge was empty again. Just rocks and snow and swaying pines. The spell was broken. I stumbled back to my truck, my legs feeling like rubber. I fumbled with the door handle, my fingers numb and clumsy, and practically fell into the driver's seat. I slammed the door and locked it, my heart still pounding. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, just breathing hard, the windows fogging up from my panicked breaths. I looked in my rearview mirror. The woman was still standing by her car, also staring up at the ridge. Then she slowly got back into her sedan. A few minutes later, the line of cars began to creep forward. Whatever had stopped us, a small slide, a car that had spun out and been righted, was cleared. We started moving, slowly, cautiously. As I drove past the spot on the ridge, I couldn't help but look up. The trees were dark and impenetrable. I saw nothing. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was inside my own house, with the door locked and the lights on. I didn't tell my wife that night. I just said the roads were bad. How do you even start that conversation? Honey, I saw a monster on the way home, but it wasn't a monster. That's the thing I've had to wrestle with ever since. A monster is from a storybook. This was an animal, a living, breathing thing. It was intelligent. Its gaze was knowing. In the years since, I've spoken to a few other people. You hear things living in Colorado. You meet someone who knows someone. I was at a diner in Woodland Park a few years back and got talking to an old trucker. He didn't even know about my experience. He just started talking about weird things he'd seen on the highways at night. He mentioned Highway 24 near Manitou in the late 90s. He said he'd been stuck in a snowstorm and saw something big and dark watching from the ridges. He said it made the hair on his neck stand up. I just nodded and said, "Yeah, I believe you." That solidified it for me. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light and the snow. It was real. It was a Bigfoot. I don't care if people think that's crazy. I know what I saw. The memory of it never really fades. It's not like a normal memory that gets fuzzy around the edges. It's as sharp and clear as it was that day. The way it stood there, so still, so completely aware of us. The way it just watched. It wasn't a violent encounter. It wasn't a chase. It was just an observation, but that somehow made it worse. The sheer, silent, predatory patience of it. The dread I felt then is the same dread I feel now, just thinking about it. That thing, whatever it was, standing 200 feet above a stranded line of cars in a snowstorm, and it was the one in control the whole time. It saw us in our vulnerable, temporary state, and then it just walked away back into the trees, leaving us with a mystery and a fear that has never ever gone away. Story 6. We got there around 4 in the morning. The drive itself was a blur of empty highways and darkness, the kind of tired where you have to roll the window down and blast the cold air just to keep your eyes from crossing. When we finally pulled into the Flamingo area, the place was dead. I mean, completely silent. No other cars, no lights, nothing. Just this heavy, wet blackness. We were supposed to find a proper campsite, but we were both so exhausted, we just couldn't face setting up a tent. We figured we'd just park somewhere legal, sleep in the car for a few hours, and deal with everything when the sun came up. We found a small parking area near what looked like a maintenance building. There was a big, industrial-sized dumpster off to the side, and the ground was covered in these pine needles. The air smelled like damp earth and something else, something sweet and rotten. We parked the car facing the trees, killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was almost louder than the club had been. I remember reclining my seat back, the leather groaning under my weight, and just closing my eyes. I was out in seconds. I don't know how long I was asleep. It couldn't have been more than an hour. What woke me up wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a pressure change, and then my friend's voice, a choked-off whisper that was more air than sound. Dude. I was still mostly asleep, my brain swimming up from a deep, dark pool. I didn't move my head from where it was resting against the cool window. I just opened my eyes, and I saw it. There was a face pressed against the glass. My side of the car. The window was tinted, but from the inside, you could see out just fine. It was right there. An eye, a huge, dark, liquid-looking eye, was staring right at me from maybe 6 inches away. It was trying to peer inside, cupping its hands around its face like you do when you're looking into a dark room from outside. My whole body just locked up. It wasn't human. It was ape-like, but not like a gorilla you see on TV. This was different. The fur covering its head, and what I could see of its face was this weird color, a reddish brown but with blondish, almost straw-colored streaks in it. It was matted and dirty. I could see the texture of it, coarse and thick. Its head was massive, blocky. I stopped breathing. I think my heart stopped too. I was frozen, just staring back into that single intelligent eye. It knew I was in here. It knew I was looking at it. I could feel my friend trembling next to me, a fine, constant vibration through the car's frame. He whispered again, "Don't move. Oh my God, don't move." The creature shifted its weight, and its head moved back from the window, just a little. That's when I got a better sense of its size. It was tall. I'd say it was at least 6 feet, maybe a bit more. It was standing on 2 legs. Its shoulders were huge and hunched. It wasn't just looking in my window. It was inspecting the whole car. It put a hand on the roof, right above my head. I didn't hear a sound, but I felt it. A dull, solid thump that traveled through the metal frame and into my seat. It was testing the car, seeing what it was. Then, a smell started to seep into the car. It was the worst thing I've ever smelled. It's hard to describe, but the closest I can get is a skunk, but mixed with something else, something deeply foul and musky, like wet dog and old garbage, and something metallic like blood. It was so strong, it made my eyes water. I heard my friend gag softly next to me. I glanced over and saw he had his shirt pulled up over his nose, his eyes wide with pure terror. I wanted to do the same, but I was too scared to move my arms. I was petrified. I just had to sit there and breathe it in. The creature seemed to lose interest in the car for a moment. It turned and ambled over to the dumpster. Its walk wasn't clumsy. It was purposeful, powerful. It moved on its legs with a slight bend in the knee, its long arms swinging. It reached the dumpster and, without any apparent effort, lifted the heavy metal lid. The sound of grinding metal was incredibly loud in the silence. It started rummaging around inside, pulling out bags of trash, tearing them open with its hands. I could hear the rustling of plastic, the wet tearing sounds as it ripped into the bags, but it didn't forget about us. Every 30 seconds or so, it would stop what it was doing and turn its head to look back at the car. That face. It wasn't the face of a curious animal. There was a sharpness there, an awareness. It was checking on us, making sure we were still there, making sure we weren't going to do anything. Each time it looked over, my blood would run cold all over again. I could feel a cold sweat soaking through my shirt, sticking to the leather seat. This went on for what felt like an eternity. My friend and I didn't speak. We barely breathed. We just sat there, 2 statues in a metal box, watching this thing exist just a few feet away from us. The only sounds were the creature messing with the garbage, the thump of its hands on the dumpster, and the frantic hammering pulse in my own ears. I remember stupid, specific details. A fly had gotten into the car earlier and was buzzing against the windshield. The digital clock on the dash read 4:52. The pine needles outside were starting to become faintly visible, a sign that the blackness of night was beginning to soften into the grey of pre-dawn. The creature seemed to find what it was looking for in the dumpster. It pulled out a large, lumpy black bag and slung it over its shoulder. It took one last, long look at our car. It stood there for a full 10 seconds, just staring. I could see its chest moving as it breathed. Then it turned and walked away. Not a run, not a hurry. Just a steady, confident walk straight into the line of trees and the swampy darkness beyond. It disappeared between the pines, and for a few seconds I could still hear the crunch of its footsteps on the ground, and then nothing. We didn't move. We sat there for another 10 minutes, maybe longer, just staring at the spot where it had vanished. The smell was still there, clinging to everything. The first real light of day was starting to color the sky a pale, sickly gray. "We need to get the camera," my friend finally said, his voice hoarse and cracked. The camera. We had a decent digital camera in the trunk. We'd brought it to take pictures of birds. The thought of getting out of the car, of walking to the trunk, of being exposed in that open space where it had just been, it was unthinkable. What if it was still there, just watching us from the trees? What if the sound of the trunk opening brought it back? "No way," I whispered back. "No fucking way are we getting out of this car." He didn't argue. We both knew it wasn't happening. The fear was a physical weight holding us in our seats. We just started the car. The engine turning over was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I put it in drive and we got the hell out of there, not speeding, but driving with a tense, careful urgency, like any sudden movement might summon it back. We drove the short distance to the main Flamingo Visitor Center. The sun was properly up now, and the place was starting to come to life with a few early rising bird watchers. It felt like we had crossed over into another world, a safe, normal world. We found a park ranger, a guy in his 50s with a weathered face and a calm demeanor. We must have looked like hell, because he gave us a long, assessing look before we even started talking. We stumbled over our words, telling him what happened. The face in the window, the size, the smell, the dumpster. I kept expecting him to laugh, or to look at us like we were crazy kids who'd had too much to drink. He didn't. He just listened, nodding slowly. When we finished, he let out a long sigh. "Park's a big place," he said, his voice completely even. "Lots of things live out here." That was it. No surprise, no shock. He wasn't skeptical. He was just matter of fact. It was the most terrifying part of the whole morning, the confirmation, without ever being explicitly stated, that we weren't the first, that this thing, whatever it was known. It was a part of this place. We didn't go camping. We just got back in the car and drove straight home to Miami Beach. We didn't talk much on the way back. What was there to say? We'd gone looking for a quiet escape and found something else entirely. I still work at the club. I still hear the bass thumping. But now sometimes, when I'm taking out the trash at the end of the night and I smell that sour, rotting smell from the dumpsters in the alley, my whole body goes cold. It's not the same smell, not even close, but it's enough. It's enough to bring it all back. That face at the window, that eye looking right at me, knowing I was in there, and the worst part, the part I can't shake, is the feeling that it wasn't just looking at a piece of metal, it was looking at me, and I have no idea what it was thinking. I probably never will. Story 7. It was late deer season in northern Arkansas, probably around the middle of December. I remember because the air had that bite to it, the kind that makes your nose hurt when you breathe in too deep. I'd been out since before sunrise, hiking into this patch of woods I've hunted for years. It's not too far from my place, maybe an hour's drive, but once you're in there, it feels like another world. Thick timber, lots of ridges and hollows, and old logging roads that are mostly overgrown now. I like hunting alone, always have. There's a peace to it, just you and the woods, no one else to worry about. That day, I'd packed light, my rifle, a thermos of coffee, some snacks, and enough layers to keep warm. The sky was overcast, the kind of grey that makes everything look muted, and there was a dampness in the air that seeped into your clothes. I'd been sitting in my stand for a couple of hours, not seeing much, just squirrels chattering and the occasional bird. My stand is set up on the edge of a clearing near a creek bed that deer like to use. Around mid-morning, I finally spotted movement. A decent 8-point buck stepped out from the tree line, cautious but not spooked. He was a good size, probably around 180 pounds, with a dark coat that stood out against the browns and greys of the winter woods. My heart started thumping, that mix of excitement and focus you get when you're about to take a shot. I raised my rifle slowly, lined up the sights, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the trees, and the buck dropped almost instantly. Clean hit. I felt that rush of relief and pride. You know, the feeling that all the patience paid off. I waited a few minutes just to make sure he was down for good, then climbed out of the stand and started making my way over. The ground was soft from recent rains, so my boots sank a little with each step. I could smell the damp earth and the faint metallic scent of blood as I got closer. The buck was lying about 50 yards away near a cluster of young pines. I remember thinking how quiet it was then, the kind of quiet where you notice every little sound, like the rustle of leaves underfoot or the distant call of a crow. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, this deafening scream ripped through the silence. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a coyote, nothing. It was guttural, deep and raw, like something tearing itself apart. It came from the woods to my left, maybe 100 yards off, and it was so loud it felt like it vibrated in my chest. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a second I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then I heard crashing, something big moving through the brush, fast and heavy. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, like a truck plowing through the undergrowth, and it was heading straight for my kill. My first thought was that it might be another hunter, but no one else should have been out there, and the sound was too wild, too animal. I gripped my rifle tighter, my palms sweating despite the cold. I took a few cautious steps forward, peering into the trees. The light was dim under the canopy, shadows shifting as the wind picked up. Then I saw it. A huge, dark figure standing over the buck. It was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was over 8 feet tall. It was covered in thick, matted hair, dark brown or black, and it moved with a power that made my stomach drop. I could see the muscles rippling under that hair as it bent over the deer. I stopped dead in my tracks, maybe 20 yards away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that tall, and they don't have that kind of build. This thing was built like a man, but huge, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its head was large, and I couldn't see its face clearly, but I got the impression of deep-set eyes and a heavy brow. The air around it felt heavy, charged, like before a storm. I could smell something too, a musky, earthy scent, like wet dog and old leaves, but stronger, almost overwhelming. The figure let out another roar, lower this time, but just as intense. It was a warning, I'm sure of it. The sound rumbled through the ground, and I felt it in my bones. It took a step toward me, and I swear the ground shook. Not like an earthquake, but enough to make me stumble back. My rifle felt useless in my hands. I didn't even think to raise it. All I could do was stare, frozen in pure terror. This thing was claiming the buck, making it clear that it was its prize now. I've never felt so small, so helpless. It was like facing a force of nature, something primal and untamed. I started backing away slowly, my eyes locked on it. Every step felt like it took forever, my legs trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't turn my back. Something in me knew that would be a mistake. The figure watched me, and I could feel its gaze, intense and predatory. Then it turned back to the deer, and in one smooth motion, it lifted the buck like it was nothing. That deer weighed 180 pounds easy, and this thing hoisted it over its shoulder like a sack of potatoes. No strain, no effort. It was effortless, and that scared me more than anything. How strong must it be to do that? It carried the deer into the timber, moving with a grace that didn't match its size. I stood there for what felt like minutes, just watching it disappear into the shadows. The crashing sounds faded and the woods went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, tense, waiting. I finally turned and started hurrying back the way I came, my heart still pounding. I didn't run, I was too scared to make noise, but I moved as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint. Every snap of a twig made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see it following me. The walk back to the logging road felt endless. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the grey light made everything look sinister. I could still smell that musky odor, like it was clinging to me. My mind was a mess. Part of me was trying to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a bear or some kind of prank, but I knew it wasn't. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what belongs there and what doesn't. This didn't belong. When I finally reached the logging road, I leaned against my truck, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the keys out. I sat in the cab for a long time, just breathing, trying to calm down. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I felt exhausted, hollow. I kept replaying it in my head, the scream, the figure, the way it looked at me. I didn't even have the buck to show for the day, but that was the last thing on my mind. I drove home in a daze, not really seeing the road. When I got back, I didn't tell my wife what happened. I just said I didn't get anything, which wasn't a lie, but it felt like one. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark figure standing over the deer, heard that roar. I've been hunting since I was a kid, and I've never been scared of the woods, but after that day, something changed. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the sounds around me. I still go out, but I stick to areas I know well, and I never stay out past dusk. I've read stories online about Bigfoot, people claiming to see things in the woods, and I used to brush them off as tall tales. But now, I don't know what to think. All I know is that I encountered something out there, something powerful and territorial, and it left me with a fear that's hard to shake. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting, and that thought alone is enough to keep me up at night. Story 8. I'd been at my buddy's place watching the game, nothing crazy, just hanging out. I left a bit later than I planned because we got caught up talking, and I remember feeling tired but alert because I hate driving at night, especially on roads like that. River Styx Road is one of those 2-lane country roads with no streetlights, just darkness broken up by my headlights. Trees crowd in on both sides, thick and tall, and in the fall, the leaves are mostly gone, so you can see a little deeper into the woods, but it's still shadowy as hell. I was driving my old Ford Focus, which has these okay but not great headlights, and I had the radio on low, just some classic rock station to keep me company. The thing about River Styx Road is that it's known for deer. I've hit one before, years ago, and it messed up my car pretty bad, so now I'm always extra careful. That night, I was driving maybe 5 miles under the speed limit, my hands tight on the wheel, eyes scanning the edges of the road for any movement. The air was cool, not cold, but enough that I had the heater on low and the window cracked to keep the air fresh. I remember the smell of damp leaves and earth coming in, that kind of earthy scent you get after a rainy day, though it hadn't rained that evening. The road was dark, really dark, with just my headlights cutting a path ahead, and the moon was out but covered by clouds, so it didn't help much. I was coming up on the stretch between Route 18 and 162, which is maybe a 10-minute drive if you're going the speed limit, but I was taking it slow. The trees here are packed close, and there are ditches on either side, so if something jumps out, you've got nowhere to go. My mind was wandering a bit, thinking about work the next day, whether I should stop for coffee on the way home, just normal stuff. Then, up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, I saw something in my headlights. At first, I thought it was a deer because that's what you expect. But the eyes, they were too high, way too high. Deer eyes are usually lower, around 3 or 4 feet off the ground, but these were up higher, like they were attached to something standing on 2 legs. I slowed down even more, my foot easing off the gas, and I leaned forward, squinting. The eyes were reflecting back this reddish-yellow glow, not like the greenish shine deer have, but more intense, almost fiery. My heart started thumping in my chest, not crazy yet, but enough that I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking, what the hell is that? And my hands got sweaty on the wheel. As I got closer, maybe 50 feet away now, I could see it wasn't a deer. It was tall, so damn tall and broad-shouldered, standing right beside a big oak tree on the passenger side of the road. I slowed the car to almost a crawl, my foot hovering over the brake. And that's when I got a clear look. This thing was covered in dark, matted hair, like it had been rolling in mud or something. And it was just standing there, not moving. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and I could see the muscles in its shoulders even through the hair. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, because it towered over the underbrush around it. The proportions were all wrong for a person, too massive, too natural, like it belonged there. No costume could look that real. I've seen Halloween stuff, and this wasn't it. The hair wasn't fake or uniform. It was clumped and dirty, with bits of leaves or twigs stuck in it. But the eyes, they're what got me. They were fixed on my car, following me as I approached, and they had this awareness to them, like it was studying me. Not aggressive, not scared, just watching. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. My breath caught in my throat, and I think I might have gasped, but I don't remember making any sound. The inside of the car felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closing in, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder than the radio. I had the urge to stop completely, to get a better look, but something in my gut told me not to. It was this primal fear, deep and instinctual, like when you're a kid and you sense something bad in the dark. I kept rolling forward, real slow, and as I passed it, maybe 20 feet away, I could see more details. The hair on its chest was thicker, almost like a mane, and its face was shadowed, but I could make out a heavy brow and a broad nose. It didn't move a muscle, just stood there with this powerful stillness, like it was rooted to the spot. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No sound from it, no rustling, nothing. The woods around us were silent too, like the crickets had stopped chirping. That silence was eerie, heavier than any noise, and it made the whole thing feel even more unreal. As I drove past, my eyes glued to it in the side mirror, I expected it to move, to chase me or something, but it didn't. It just stayed there, a dark silhouette against the tree, and those eyes kept watching until I was too far to see them anymore. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to grip the wheel tighter, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I didn't look back over my shoulder. I couldn't. Something in me was screaming to just keep going, to not tempt fate. So I pressed down on the gas, not too hard at first, but then I accelerated, getting up to speed and then some, my heart racing like I'd just run a mile. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I remember turning up the radio to drown out my thoughts, but it didn't help. My mind was replaying those few seconds over and over. The height of those eyes, the way it stood, the sheer size of it. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me, but the road behind was empty, just darkness. When I got to my house, I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a minute, engine off, just breathing. The inside of the car smelled like my own fear, that sour scent of sweat and adrenaline. I looked at my hands. They were still trembling, and I had to wipe them on my jeans. I got out and went inside, locking the door behind me, something I don't always do. I didn't turn on all the lights right away. I just stood in the living room listening, like I might hear something outside. But it was quiet, normal quiet. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, but my throat was so dry it was hard to swallow. I kept thinking about reporting it, maybe calling the police or something, but what would I say? Hey, I saw a big hairy thing on River Styx Road. They'd laugh me off, or worse, think I was drunk or crazy. I hadn't been drinking. I never do when I drive, but I knew how it sounded, so I didn't say anything. I just went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those reddish-yellow eyes staring back at me. The next day I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing games because I was tired. But the more I thought about it, the more real it felt. I remembered little things, like how the hair on its arms was longer near the wrists, or how one of its feet was partly hidden in the grass, but I could see it was big and wide, not like a boot. I thought about going back to look for tracks, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Even now, weeks later, I avoid that road if I can, taking the longer way home. What gets me is the silence. It didn't make a sound, didn't move, just watched. I've seen bears out in the woods before and they're big, but this was different. It felt intelligent, like it knew what I was, and it was just observing. I've replayed that moment in my head 100 times, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. Was it a bear standing on its hind legs? Maybe, but bears don't stand that still, and their eyes don't reflect light like that. And the height, 8 feet tall, that's huge for a bear around here. Plus the arms were too long hanging down like that. Nothing fits. I've read stuff online about Bigfoot sightings, and some of it matches up. The height, the hair, the eyes. But reading about it is one thing, seeing it is another. It's left me with this mix of shock and fear that I can't shake. Sometimes I'll be driving at night and I'll get that same chill, like I'm back on River Styx Road, seeing those eyes again. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But that night, for those few seconds, I felt like I was in the presence of something ancient and powerful. Something that shouldn't exist. And the worst part is, I can't forget it. It's just there, in my head, waiting whenever I close my eyes. Story 9. It was one of those perfect October Saturdays, the kind that only seems to exist when you're 18. The air was cool and crisp, but the sun was warm on your skin. Me and my 3 friends had decided to hit up the local farm's annual fall festival. You know the type. Hay rides, overpriced caramel apples, and a giant corn maze that was supposedly the biggest in the county. We were just killing time, really. There wasn't anything better to do. We paid our $10 each and got our little paper maps, the kind that are basically useless because the corn is so high you can't see any landmarks. The stalks were way over our heads, dry and rustling with every little breeze. It was around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, slanted shadows through the maze that made everything feel kind of golden and stretched out. We'd been in there for maybe 45 minutes, just laughing, taking wrong turns, and joking about how we were definitely going to be the idiots who needed the farm guy on the tractor to come rescue us. The maze was dead quiet except for us and the sound of our own feet crunching on the dry dirt path. Every now and then you'd hear a faint laugh or shout from some other group, but it always sounded miles away. I was walking a little bit behind the others. I remember I'd just finished laughing at something one of my friends said, and I turned my head to the left, looking down one of the narrow corridors between the corn walls. And that's when I saw it. It was about 30 feet away, standing perfectly still in the gap between 2 rows of stalks. It wasn't a person. I knew that instantly, in my gut. My brain just sort of short-circuited. It was short, maybe only 4 feet tall, but built solid. It was covered in this thick, matted, dark brown hair, like a wet dog. But it wasn't shaggy. It was tight to its body. Its limbs were weirdly long and thin for its torso, and it was standing kind of crouched, like it was ready to spring. But the worst part was its face. It didn't have a snout or anything. It was flat with dark, deep-set eyes that were just black. No white at all. They were fixed right on me. My breath just froze in my chest. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the maze. My heart didn't just start beating fast. It felt like it was slamming against my ribs, a hard, painful thumping that I could feel in my throat. This all happened in maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I was just locked in, staring at this thing, and it was staring right back. Then it moved. It didn't run like a person. It dropped down onto all fours, but it wasn't clumsy. It was unbelievably graceful and silent. Its long arms and legs moved in this fluid, balanced motion like a big cat, and it just shot between the corn stalks. I didn't hear a single rustle. Not one. The corn stalks didn't even seem to move. It was just there 1 second, a dark shape in the shadows, and then it was gone, vanished into the wall of corn like it had never been there at all. My body unlocked all at once. I gasped in a breath so loud it was almost a sob. I spun around to my friends who were still walking ahead, completely oblivious. "Hey," I whispered. It came out as a croak. My throat was bone dry. "Hey, guys." They stopped and turned around. "What's up? You see the way out?" one of them asked. I just pointed a shaky hand towards where it had been. There was something there. "What, like a dog?" another friend said, peering down the corridor. It was empty. Just corn and shadows. No, not a dog. I couldn't find the words. How do you say, "I just saw a miniature Bigfoot," without sounding like a complete lunatic? It was an animal. It was standing up. It looked at me. They all laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "Dude, you're seeing things. It's probably just one of those scarecrow props the farm put in to freak people out." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. A prop doesn't move like that. A prop doesn't have eyes that look right into you. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, under my jacket. My hands were trembling. I kept staring at the spot, expecting it to reappear, for those dark eyes to peek out from between the stalks again. "Come on, let's keep going," my friend said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're freaking yourself out." I couldn't let it go. As we started walking again, I kept my eyes glued to the corn walls on our left. My friends fell back into their joking, their pace casual, but I was wound tighter than a spring. Every little sound was amplified. The rustle of the corn in the wind sounded like footsteps. A bird calling in the distance sounded like a signal. The whole atmosphere of the maze had changed for me. It wasn't a fun, silly challenge anymore. It felt like a trap. The walls felt like they were closing in. The golden light was now just long, creepy shadows that hid things. I was constantly scanning, my head on a swivel, my heart still doing that frantic, painful pounding. I felt a primal kind of fear, the kind that sits in the base of your skull and tells you you're being hunted. We took a few more turns. I was barely listening to my friends. I was just waiting, watching, and then I saw movement again. It was further away this time, maybe 50 or 60 feet down a perpendicular path we were about to cross. Just a flicker of dark brown, low to the ground, moving parallel to us. It was so fast. It was that same low, fluid run. My blood went cold. "It's back!" I hissed, grabbing my friend's arm so hard he yelped. "What is your problem?" he said, pulling his arm away. "It's following us." My voice was trembling. I couldn't control it. They all looked where I was pointing. Nothing, of course. Nothing. The path was empty. "Man, you need to chill out. There's nothing there." But it was there. I saw it. And now I knew it wasn't just a chance encounter. It was keeping pace with us. It was watching us. A cold dread, heavier than any fear I'd ever felt, settled in my stomach. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was terror. We picked up the pace. My friends were still skeptical, but my panic was starting to infect them. The joke stopped. We walked faster, our footsteps louder on the packed earth. I was at the back of the group now, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, my neck aching from the tension. I felt exposed. I felt like something was right behind me, just out of sight, its dark eyes watching the back of my head. The maze seemed to go on forever. Every turn looked the same. The map was a crumpled, useless ball in my friend's pocket. The sun was getting lower, and the shadows were deepening, turning from gold to a gloomy blue. It was getting harder to see into the gaps between the stalks. Anything could be hiding in there. Then we heard it. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a sound I've never heard before or since. A low, guttural, chuffing sound, like a heavy breath but with a wet, clicking undertone. It came from our right, from inside the corn, not more than 20 feet away. We all froze dead in our tracks. What the hell was that? One of my friends whispered, his eyes wide. That's when they finally believed me. The color drained from their faces. That sound wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal we knew. It was wrong. The sound came again, closer this time. Chuff. Click. We didn't say another word. We ran. It wasn't a coordinated run. It was a blind, panicked sprint. We didn't care about the path anymore. We just crashed forward, shoving corn stalks out of the way, thorns and dry leaves scraping our arms and faces. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the pounding of our feet, and the terrifying rustle of something moving fast through the corn to our right, keeping up with us easily. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and I saw it. For a split second, I saw its dark shape, low to the ground, moving through the stalks with an impossible silence and speed. It wasn't crashing through the corn like we were. It was parting it, flowing through it like water. That image is burned into my brain. The sleek, dark form, the glint of a black eye in the fading light, the effortless, powerful motion. It was built for this. We were just clumsy intruders. My lungs were on fire. I could taste blood in my mouth from biting my cheek. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting out. The fear was so overwhelming, it was a physical force pushing me forward. Then ahead of us we saw it. An opening, a sliver of the open field, the parking lot, the farm stand, freedom. With a final, desperate burst of energy, we crashed out of the corn and into the open. We didn't stop running until we were halfway across the parking lot, surrounded by other families carrying pumpkins and kids with cotton candy. We bent over, hands on our knees, gasping for air. We were a mess, covered in dirt, our clothes torn, our faces scratched and pale. People were staring at us. We must have looked insane. What was that? My friend finally managed to say between gulps of air. I just shook my head. I couldn't speak. I was still trembling all over, my legs feeling like jelly. I turned and looked back at the maze. The entrance was just a dark hole in a vast, rustling sea of corn. It looked innocent now, just a fun autumn attraction. But I knew what was in there. We stood there for a long time, just trying to catch our breath and process what had happened. Nobody suggested going back to get our stuff from the car we'd left near the entrance. We just walked to the far end of the parking lot and called a parent for a ride, making up some story about one of us feeling sick. The whole ride home, I was silent. I kept seeing those black eyes. I kept hearing that wet, chuffing sound. I felt its presence, like a cold spot that hadn't left me. I never told any adults. What would I have said? I saw a little Bigfoot in the corn maze. They'd have laughed or sent me for a psych evaluation. But I know what I saw. It was real. It was intelligent. It was watching us. And for a little while, it was hunting us. I can still feel that primal fear. If I let myself think about it too long, I can still see it clear as day, standing there in the shadows between the stalks, looking right at me before it dropped down and ran, silent as a ghost, into the corn. And I still don't know what it wanted, or why it chose to show itself to me. I guess I never will. Story 10. It was mid-October of 2004. I was 51 years old, and I'd been hunting in Aroostook County, Maine, my whole life. You get to know a place, the way the light falls through the spruce in the late afternoon, the particular quiet of a swamp at dusk. You think you know all its sounds. You think you know what belongs there. That morning I learned I didn't know a damn thing. I'd left my truck in the dark hours before first light. The air had that sharp, frosty bite to it that makes your nose hairs feel brittle. My breath plumed out in front of me, a little cloud in the beam of my headlamp. I was heading for a low ridge system west of the Big Black River. It was moose season, and I'd scouted a good spot near a clear-cut patch, a place where they'd come out to browse on the new growth. I settled in against a big old pine, its roots making a natural backrest, with a good view of the clearing. I remember the silence was so complete, it felt like a physical thing, a weight on my ears. The only sound was the faint crunch of frost under my boots as I shifted to get comfortable. Dawn came slow, painting the sky a washed-out grey, then a pale, watery pink. The mist was clinging to everything, making the world look soft and blurred at the edges. It was beautiful, peaceful. I remember thinking it was going to be a good day. I had my rifle, a .30-06, resting across my knees. The cold of the steel seeped right through my pants. I was just sitting there, watching my breath, waiting for the woods to wake up. Then, a little after 7 in the morning, the woods woke up in a way I never expected. The first thing I heard was the footfalls, heavy, not the delicate 4-step pattern of a deer. This was a slow, deliberate thump, 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 like someone was dropping sacks of wet cement onto the ground. They were coming from the thick timber to my left, maybe 150 yards off. I remember my first stupid thought was, "That's a big damn moose." But moose don't walk like that. Their gait is different, more of a lope. This was a two-legged walk, a bipedal, heavy, confident walk. I slowly raised my binoculars, my heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. I scanned the tree line, but the mist was still thick in there, turning the spruce and fir into dark, shapeless ghosts. The footsteps stopped, and then the other sounds started. It was a cracking sound, a loud, wet, splintering crack. Not like a branch breaking, this was different. It was the sound a big bone makes when it's green, and it's being broken over something with immense force. Crack. A pause. Then another one. Crack. And with the sound came the smell. It hit me like a physical blow to the gut. It was a mix of things, a horrible cocktail of stench. The first wave was straight-up rotting meat, the kind of smell that makes your saliva go thick and sour in your mouth. Under that was the smell of a wet dog, but a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead for a week. And underneath it all, the low, foul stink of stagnant swamp water, the kind that's full of decay. It was so strong, it felt like I could taste it, a coating of filth on the back of my tongue. My stomach rolled. I actually had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. My hands were tight on the binoculars now. I was scanning, trying to find the source. The mist shifted for just a second, a gap in the wall of grey and green, and I saw it. It was standing upright, partially hidden behind a thick fir tree. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be over 7 feet, easy. It was built like a goddamn refrigerator, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the trees behind it. It was covered in hair, a dark, greyish-brown colour, like wet bark. It was matted and shaggy. It was holding something. It took my brain a second to process what it was. A leg, a moose leg, still with the hoof on it. The thing had its back mostly to me, and it was bringing the leg up to its face. I saw its head turn slightly, and I saw a profile, a heavy brow ridge, and beneath it, deep-set eyes that I couldn't see the colour of, just dark pits. Then it opened its mouth. It had big, square, blocky teeth, yellowish-white. It clamped down on the moose leg, and I heard that wet, crunching sound again. It wasn't just eating, it was demolishing the bone. It was chewing on it like a dog with a tough chew toy, but with a power that was just unnatural. I must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath. Or maybe I shifted my weight and a twig snapped. I don't know, but its head snapped up. It stopped chewing, and it turned to look right at me. Those deep-set eyes locked onto mine from 150 yards away. I felt it. I felt that gaze like a physical pressure. It wasn't the blank stare of a bear or a deer. There was something in there, a a sharp, terrifying intelligence. It dropped the moose leg onto the ground with a heavy thud. Its chest swelled and it let out a roar. It wasn't a sound I can properly describe. It was low and guttural, starting deep in its chest and rising into a deafening bellow that seemed to shake the very air. It wasn't just loud, it had a physical component. I felt it vibrate in my own chest cavity, a deep, resonant thrum that made my teeth ache. The sound ripped through the quiet morning, shredding the peace into a million terrified pieces. Birds I didn't even know were there exploded from the trees in a panic of wings. Then it took a step toward me, just one. It wasn't a charge. It was a statement. It reached out with one long, heavily muscled arm to a young sapling, a birch tree about as thick as my wrist. It didn't swing at it, it just slammed its open palm against the trunk. The sound was a sharp pistol shot. Crack! The tree didn't just break. It exploded. The top half of the sapling went flying off into the brush, the white wood inside gleaming against the dark forest floor. While it did this, it started swaying. A slow, rhythmic swaying from side to side, and it began stamping one of its huge feet on the ground. Thump, thump, thump. It was a display, a pure, unadulterated, intimidating display. It was showing me its power. It was telling me without any doubt that I was in its world, on its terms. My body just shut down. My brain was screaming, a high-pitched whine of pure terror. My mouth went completely dry, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth like sandpaper. My hands, which had been holding the binoculars, started to shake so badly I had to lower them. My fingers felt numb and cold. I looked down at my rifle, the 30-006 that had always been my security, my equalizer in the woods. In that moment, it felt like a toy, a stupid, useless piece of metal and wood. The thought of raising it, of aiming, of firing, it felt like a death sentence. Firing at that thing would be like poking a bear with a stick, only this was a bear from some prehistoric nightmare. It would just make it angry. It would give it a reason to cross that 150 yards and turn me into a red smear on the forest floor. So I froze. I didn't move a muscle. I just sat there, pressed against that pine tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I was sure the thing could hear it. The smell was still there, that awful, gut-churning stench of death and swamp. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears, the swaying, the stamping, its eyes still fixed on me. It felt like it went on for an hour. In reality, it was probably less than a minute of the most profound, soul-scraping terror I have ever experienced. Then it just stopped. The swaying ceased. The stamping ended. It broke eye contact with me, looked down at the moose leg on the ground, and in one fluid, powerful motion, it bent over, scooped the limb up, and turned. It didn't run, it didn't look back. It just strode off into the deeper timber, its huge form moving with an unsettling grace, swallowed by the mist and the shadows between the trees. I stayed there, I don't know how long enough for the adrenaline to fade, and for a deep, bone-aching cold to set in. My legs were trembling when I finally forced myself to stand up. I didn't even bother brushing the dirt and pine needles off my pants. I just grabbed my rifle, my pack, and I got the hell out of there. I walked fast at first. Then I was practically running, my head on a swivel, expecting to hear those heavy footfalls behind me at any second. I didn't stop until I was back at my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands still shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. The next day, the fear had been replaced by a kind of numb, buzzing disbelief. Had I really seen that? Had my mind, a seasoned hunter's mind, just conjured up some crazy thing? I needed to know. I couldn't live with the not knowing. I called up a buddy of mine, another hunter, a guy who wouldn't laugh me out of the state. I didn't tell him what I saw. I just said I'd found a weird kill site and wanted a second pair of eyes. We went back. The sun was out, the mist was gone, and the woods looked normal again. But they didn't feel normal. Not to me. We found the spot. It wasn't hard. We found the moose carcass first, or what was left of it. It was torn apart. The bones, they weren't just broken, they were splintered, shattered. A bear will crunch through bone to get to the marrow, but this was different. It was like the bones had been put in some kind of industrial press. The spine was just pulp. The skull was crushed. And then we found the footprints. They were in a patch of soft, damp earth near the broken sapling. They were huge, over 16 inches long. They were human-like, but not human. The toes were splayed wide and the arch was flat. They were deep, sunk into the ground with a weight I couldn't comprehend. My buddy just stared at them, then at the broken tree, then back at the mangled moose. He whistled low. "Ain't no bear did this," he said, his voice quiet. "No bear I ever seen." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Seeing it all there, in the clear light of day, the physical evidence laid out in the mud and the blood and the splintered wood, it solidified everything. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't lost my mind. I had been in the territory of something territorial, something immensely powerful, and something that knew exactly how to make sure I never, ever forgot it. I wasn't just a hunter in the woods that day, I was a guest, and I had been told in no uncertain terms that my visit was over. The smell of that thing, that rotten meat and wet dog stench, it stayed in my nose for days. Sometimes even now I think I can still smell it. Story 11. It was September of 2010, and I was 40 years old. I'd driven up from Durango to one of the remote alpine lakes in the San Juan Mountains. I'd been going through a rough patch, nothing major, just the kind of low-grade, constant stress that makes the walls of your life feel like they're closing in. I needed to get away from everything. No phone, no people, no noise, just the quiet of the mountains. I'd hiked in on a Thursday afternoon. The trail was tough, the kind that burns your thighs and makes you question your life choices with every switchback. But when I broke through the tree line and saw the lake, it was worth it. The water was like dark glass, perfectly reflecting the peaks around it. It was so quiet you could hear the air moving. I set up my camp about 100 yards back from the shore, in a small flat clearing surrounded by tall pines. It was perfect. The evening was uneventful in the best way. I made a small fire, cooked a simple dinner of dehydrated pasta, and just sat there, watching the stars pop out one by one. The air got cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, but the fire kept it at bay. I remember feeling a deep sense of peace, like I'd finally shaken off the dust of town. I doused the fire thoroughly, crawled into my tent, and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. I fell asleep almost instantly, the kind of dead-to-the-world sleep you only get when you're truly exhausted and alone in the wilderness. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was the dead of night, pitch black inside the tent. But I wasn't awake because of a dream or because I had to pee. I was awake because I heard something, breathing, not my own. This was heavy, deep, the kind of breathing you'd expect from a large animal, a horse or a bear, but slower, more controlled. It was right outside my tent. My entire body went rigid. I stopped breathing myself, straining to listen. The sound was so close, it was like whoever, or whatever, was making it had its face pressed against the thin nylon wall of my tent. I could hear the slow, powerful inhale, the pause, and the long, wet-sounding exhale. It was a big sound, a living sound. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering that felt like it was going to break something. I was lying on my side, facing the wall of the tent, and I didn't dare move a muscle. I remember the feeling of the cold ground seeping through my sleeping pad, a sharp contrast to the sweat that was suddenly soaking my long underwear. My mouth was desert dry. Then the footsteps started. Thump, thump. They were heavy, so heavy I could feel the vibration through the ground. Each step was a distinct, solid impact that made the pine needles under my tent shift slightly. It wasn't the light, scampering sound of a raccoon or a deer. This was weight, serious weight. The breathing moved with the footsteps circling my tent. It completed one full circle, and then it stopped right back where it started, near my head. The breathing was louder now, more pronounced. I could hear a low, guttural rumble mixed in with it. Not a snarl, not yet, but a vibration, like the idle of a massive ancient engine. It was a growl that was more felt than heard, a resonance that settled deep in my chest and made my teeth feel funny. I was frozen, absolutely paralyzed. My mind was screaming at me to grab my knife, to unzip the tent and run, to do something. But my body wouldn't listen. It was like every survival instinct had short-circuited and left me with this one useless command: don't move, don't let it know you're here. But it knew. It absolutely knew I was here. This wasn't a random passing. This felt deliberate. Then I heard a new sound. A sniff, a long, wet sniffing sound, like a dog trying to scent something, but bigger, deeper. It was sniffing at the seam of my tent fly, right by my face. I could picture it, this massive head lowering itself to the ground, its nose just inches from mine, separated only by a thin layer of nylon. I could smell it then, too. A smell I'd never encountered before. It was musky, thick, like wet dog and old leaves and something else, something foul and wild, like rotten meat. It filled my nostrils and made my stomach clench. The fear was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical state. My muscles were trembling so hard I was worried the vibrations would be visible. I was cold and hot at the same time. My bladder felt painfully full, and I was desperately, shamefully afraid I was going to wet myself. Then came the scrape. It was a single deliberate drag against the tent wall, not a clawing, not an attack, a scrape. It was the sound of something rough and hard, a nail, a talon, something being dragged slowly down the fabric from the top of the dome near my head, down towards the ground. It made a sound like fabric tearing, but it didn't tear. The tent held. The sound itself was what tore through me. It was a message. It was testing. It was saying, I am here, and this is what is between us. That's when something in me broke. The passive, frozen fear was suddenly replaced by a frantic electric panic. I couldn't just lie there and wait. I had to see. I had to know what was out there. It was a stupid, reckless impulse, but it overrode the paralysis. Moving felt like breaking out of a plaster cast. Every motion was agonizingly slow and loud. The rustle of my sleeping bag sounded like thunder. The zipper of the bag was impossibly loud. I shifted onto my knees, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My small black Maglite flashlight was lying next to my pillow. My fingers closed around its cool, rubberized body. The tent had a main door and a smaller mesh window on the opposite side. The sounds were coming from the door side. I decided to use the window. Maybe I could get a glimpse without it knowing. I crawled to the back of the tent, my knees pressing into the soft ground. The sniffing had stopped. The footsteps had stopped. It was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, a waiting quiet. The heavy breathing was still there, but it was softer now, more distant. Or was it? It was hard to tell. With a trembling hand, I found the small zipper for the mesh window. The zip sound it made was tiny, but in the silence, it was as sharp as a gunshot. I held my breath. Nothing happened. I peeled back the mesh slowly. The cold night air hit my face. I pointed the flashlight out the opening, my thumb hovering over the button. I took one more ragged breath, and I pressed it. The beam was a tight, white circle in the overwhelming blackness. It cut through the night, illuminating the trunks of the pine trees, the fallen logs, the patchy grass. And then I saw it. It wasn't standing right by the tent. It was about 30 feet away, at the edge of the tree line, already moving. The beam caught it from the side and back as it was walking, loping, uphill, away from me. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing dwarfed me. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in long, shaggy hair that was a dark, matted brown, almost black in the flashlight beam. It wasn't walking like a man. Its shoulders were huge and hunched, and its arms were long, swinging powerfully as it moved. It didn't look back. It just moved with a purpose, a fluid, powerful gait that ate up the ground, heading up the steep slope behind my camp as if it were flat ground. The glimpse lasted maybe 2 seconds, 3 at most. Then it stopped. It stopped dead in its tracks, halfway up the slope. It didn't turn around, it just froze, and then it let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a growl, but a growl so deep, so loud, so full of pure raw power that it doesn't have a name. It was a physical force. It hit me in the chest, a deep bass vibration that made my insides feel like jelly. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the granite faces of the mountains around the lake, rolling through the valley, filling the entire world. It was deafening. It was a sound of pure warning, of rage, of dominance. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard, before or since, and then it was gone. The sound stopped. The creature was gone, vanished into the thick timber. The echo faded, leaving a silence that was somehow louder and more profound than before. I dropped the flashlight. It clicked off as it hit the floor of the tent. I stayed on my knees, my hands pressed against the cold ground, my head hanging down. I was gasping for air, my whole body convulsing with silent, ragged sobs. I didn't cry out of sadness. I cried out of a terror so complete it had emptied me. I had seen something that was not supposed to exist, and it had seen me, and it had made sure I knew it. I didn't sleep another second that night. I sat there in the dark, my back against the tent pole, my knees pulled to my chest, my knife clutched in my hand. Every tiny sound, the rustle of a leaf, the creak of a tree, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I was convinced it was still out there, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. The smell lingered for a long time, that awful, musky stench. I felt nauseous. The memory of that growl was stuck in my head, on a loop. I could still feel it in my bones. The wait for dawn was the longest of my life. The blackness outside the tent slowly, imperceptibly, turned to deep blue, then to gray. When I could finally see the shapes of the trees clearly, I slowly, carefully unzipped the tent door and crawled out. The morning was crisp and beautiful. The lake was still. A mist was rising off the water. It was a postcard scene, and it felt like the most sinister lie I had ever seen. My eyes went immediately to the ground around my tent, and I saw them. Tracks, massive human-like footprints, but way too big. I knelt down beside one. I placed my own boot next to it. My size 11 boot was a child's toy next to this thing. I didn't have a tape measure, but I used the length of my knife from the hilt to the tip. It was about 8 inches. The track was easily double that, 16 inches at least. The print was deep, pressed firmly into the damp earth, showing immense weight. The stride between them was huge, confirming the powerful gait I'd seen. My eyes followed the trail. They circled my tent, just as I'd heard the footsteps do. Then they led away, up the slope to where I'd seen the creature, and there, at the tree line, I saw where it had pushed through. A young aspen sapling about as thick as my wrist was snapped in half, the break fresh and white against the grey morning. It hadn't been stepped on. It looked like it had been shoved aside, brushed away like a twig. That was it for me. Any thought of staying, any notion of being rational, vanished. I've never packed a camp so fast in my life. My hands were still shaking so badly I could barely roll my sleeping bag. I didn't care about folding things neatly. I just stuffed everything into my pack, my head on a swivel, constantly scanning the tree line. I felt exposed, like a bug on a plate. I didn't even stop to filter water. I just shouldered my pack, my legs feeling weak and rubbery, and started hiking out. The whole way down that mountain, I felt it. I know people say that, but I mean I really, truly felt it. A prickling on the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched from the deep shadows between the trees. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything, but the feeling was so intense, so palpable, that I kept glancing back, expecting to see that dark, shaggy form keeping pace with me just inside the forest. I half jogged, half stumbled down that trail, not stopping for anything, driven by a primal need to get back to my car, back to pavement, back to a world where things like that weren't supposed to be real. I made it to my truck, threw my pack in the back, and got the hell out of there. I drove straight home to Durango, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way. I've never gone solo camping again. Not once. I'll go with a big group, and I stick close to the campfire. But I'll never forget that night. It wasn't just the size of it or the sound. It was the feeling of the whole encounter. It didn't feel like a random animal encounter. It felt deliberate. It felt like it knew I was there. It knew I was scared, and it was playing with me. The circling, the sniffing, the scrape on the tent. That was intimidation. That was a show of power. I wasn't just a piece of meat to it. I was an intruder, and it wanted me to know whose woods I was in. I still think about it, especially on quiet nights. I'll be lying in my own bed, in my safe house, and I'll remember the sound of that breathing right outside the thin fabric. I'll remember the vibration of its steps. I'll remember the smell, and I'll remember that final deafening growl that seemed to shake the very mountains. I saw something out there in the San Juans that I can't explain, something that shouldn't be, and it looked back at me. And sometimes I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 12. It was last October. Me and two buddies from work, Mark and Chris, had this big camping trip planned for over in the Coconino National Forest. We'd been talking about it for weeks, getting our gear together, planning our hikes. But then, like 2 days before we were supposed to leave, the wildfires kicked up again. They closed our whole planned area. We were pissed, man, seriously bummed. We'd all taken the Friday off and everything. So we're sitting around my apartment, feeling sorry for ourselves, and Chris pulls out his phone. He starts scrolling through maps and says, "What about Miller Canyon? Down near the border. It's not as high elevation. Should be clear." We looked at the satellite images and it seemed okay. No active fire zones nearby. We figured, hell, it's better than sitting around here all weekend. We just wanted to be outside, you know? Get away from the city noise for a couple days. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The drive was long, and by the time we found a spot we liked off one of the dirt service roads, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. The air was cool and dry, the way it only gets in the desert in the fall. It smelled like dust and pine. We found a decently flat clearing, maybe 20 yards off the road, surrounded by these scrub oaks and tall ponderosa pines. It felt secluded but not creepy. We set up our tent, this old green dome tent I've had since college. It's a 3-person, but with 3 grown men and our gear, it's a tight squeeze. We've got a mesh ceiling panel, which is great for stargazing when the weather's nice. We got a fire going, cooked some burgers on the grate we brought, had a few beers. It was a good night. Normal. We were laughing, talking about work, about stupid stuff. The sky was incredibly clear. I remember lying back and looking up at the Milky Way, this faint smeared band of light. There was no moon yet. It was pitch black away from the fire. The kind of dark where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. We turned in around 11, the usual routine. Zip ourselves into our sleeping bags, a bit of joking around, then quiet. The sounds of the forest took over. Crickets, the occasional rustle of something small in the leaves, the wind sighing through the pine needles. I fell asleep pretty quickly. It was a deep, solid sleep, the kind you only get out in the fresh air. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was a feeling, a shift in the air pressure, or maybe just a deep animal part of my brain screaming that something was wrong. I was on my back, and I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the mesh ceiling of the tent, and beyond it, the moon. It had risen while we slept, a bright, nearly full moon that cast a silvery cold light over everything. It was so bright I could see the individual branches of the trees above us. And then I heard Mark. He was in the sleeping bag to my left. He made this sound. It wasn't a word. It was a choked-off guttural noise, like all the air had been punched out of him. My head turned toward him, and that's when I saw it. Through the mesh, right above me, was a face. My brain just froze. It completely short-circuited. It couldn't process what it was seeing. The moon was directly behind its head, so the whole thing was a perfect jet-black silhouette. There was no detail, just a shape. But what a shape! It was huge. The head was massive, like a gorilla's, but longer. It was sort of oval, but blocky, and it had no neck. I mean, it just ended. The bottom of the head merged directly into these impossibly broad, sloping shoulders. It was leaning over the tent, and I could see its outline against the moonlit sky. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. The top of its head was a good foot or two above the peak of our dome tent. We were just staring at each other. Me, lying flat on my back, looking straight up, and it, looking straight down. I couldn't see a mouth or a nose, just the dark shape of its head. But I could see its eyes. That's the part that haunts me the most. The eyes. They weren't glowing red or anything like in the movies. They were just there. In the shadow of its face, I could see 2 spots where the moonlight caught them. They weren't reflective like an animal's. They were just lighter, like the whites of a human's eyes, and they were fixed on me, not moving, just locked onto mine. Time stopped. My heart wasn't even beating. It was just a solid, cold stone in my chest. My breath was gone. I was paralyzed. Every hair on my body was standing straight up. I could feel a cold sweat instantly break out all over my skin, soaking through my t-shirt. My fingers were clenched into fists inside my sleeping bag, my nails digging into my palms. I could feel the rough nylon of the bag against my knuckles. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a deafening whooshing sound. I remember thinking very clearly, this is not a bear. It wasn't a logical thought. It was a primal, absolute certainty that dropped into my gut like a lead weight. A bear doesn't stand like that. A bear doesn't have a head shaped like that. A bear doesn't stare you down with that kind of awareness. It was Bigfoot. The word appeared in my head, and with it came a wave of pure, undiluted terror that washed through my entire body. It was a physical sensation, like I'd been dipped in ice water. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I felt sick. This wasn't the fun campfire story fear. This was the fear of being prey, the fear of being completely and utterly outmatched by something you cannot comprehend. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. There was no heavy breathing, no grunt, no sniffing, just silence. The forest had gone dead quiet. The crickets had stopped. The wind had stopped. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, watching this thing watch me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only 30 seconds, maybe less. It was long enough for me to memorize every contour of that silhouette against the moon, the curve of its head, the sheer mass of its shoulders. Then it moved. It didn't jerk or startle. It just straightened up. Slowly, its head lifted away from the mesh, and the massive shoulders rolled back. It was so fluid, so unnaturally quiet for something that size. I saw its full height then, towering over our flimsy little tent. It was a monolith, a living shadow, and then it was gone. It didn't run. It just turned and melted into the trees. I didn't hear a single footstep. No crunch of twigs, no rustle of leaves. It just vanished into the blackness between the pines. The second it was out of my sight, The spell broke. I sucked in a ragged, desperate gasp of air. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst, and I screamed. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a raw, involuntary sound that ripped out of my throat. Holy shit! I scrambled in my sleeping bag, trying to sit up, but I was tangled and my limbs weren't working right. I was just thrashing. Chris jolted awake next to me. What is it?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Mark was already sitting bolt upright. He was breathing in short, sharp gasps. "Did you see it?" he whispered. His voice was shaking. "Did you see it?" "See what?" Chris said, now fully awake and alarmed. "There was something outside," I managed to say. My own voice was a dry croak, looking in at us. We all fell silent, listening. The forest was still dead quiet. The normal night sounds were just gone. It was the most oppressive silence I have ever experienced. We were frozen there, 3 grown men huddled in a flimsy nylon shelter, too terrified to move. I kept staring at the mesh ceiling, expecting that face to come back, expecting a massive hand to tear through the fabric. "What was it?" Chris asked, his voice low. I looked at Mark. His face was pale in the faint moonlight coming through the mesh. He just shook his head, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in him before. He's an ex-Marine. I've seen him calm in situations that would have most people losing their minds. But he looked terrified. "I don't know," I said. But I did know. We all knew. We just couldn't say it. We didn't leave the tent, not for the rest of the night. We just sat there, huddled in our sleeping bags, staring at the walls, jumping at every little sound our own bodies made. The feeling of being watched was so intense it was like a physical pressure on my skin. I kept my eyes glued to the mesh window, scanning the tree line. I didn't see anything, just the silent, motionless trees. The hours dragged on. The moon moved across the sky. None of us slept a wink. We barely spoke. What was there to say? We couldn't rationalize it. We couldn't explain it away. A bear would have made noise. A person would have said something or had a flashlight. This was something else. When the first hint of grey dawn finally lightened the eastern sky, it was the most profound relief I have ever felt. The world slowly came back to life. A bird chirped somewhere, then another. The silence was broken. We waited until the sun was fully up, casting long, sharp shadows across the forest floor, before any of us dared to move. Unzipping the tent door felt like the most courageous act of my life. I peered out, my heart still thumping. The clearing was empty. The dirt road was just how we left it. Everything looked normal, peaceful. We climbed out, stiff and exhausted. The first thing we did was look at the ground around our tent, and there they were. In the soft, dusty soil, right where the thing had been standing, were footprints. They were enormous. I wear a size 12 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was easily half again as long and twice as wide. The print was deep, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. The shape was wrong. It was vaguely human-like, but the toes were splayed out, and the whole thing was just too big, too wide. It wasn't a boot print. It wasn't a bear print. It was something in between. We just stared at them. None of us said a word. Mark pulled out his phone and took a few pictures, his hands shaking so badly the images are all blurry. We packed up our gear in record time, not talking, just throwing everything into the back of the truck in a frantic, silent hurry. We didn't even make coffee. We just got in and drove, bouncing down that dirt road way too fast, not looking back. The whole drive home, no one spoke. We just listened to the radio, not really hearing it. Every shadow in the woods lining the highway made my breath catch. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times, the way the moonlight lit up the mesh, the absolute silence, the shape of that head, blocky and necklace, those eyes just watching me, the feeling of being completely known, completely seen by something that wasn't supposed to exist. I've always trusted my senses. I'm a practical guy. I fix cars for a living. I deal with what's in front of me. That wasn't a dream. It was too vivid, too real. The cold sweat, the feeling of my heart slamming against my ribs, the taste of fear in my mouth. That wasn't a nightmare. That was real. It changed me. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. I get anxious when it starts to get dark. I look at the tree line differently now. I used to see peace and quiet. Now I see 1,000 places for something to hide, to watch. I know, with a certainty that sits cold in my gut, that we are not always at the top of the food chain. There are things out there in the dark, things we don't understand, and sometimes they decide to let you know they're there. They just lean over your tent and they look you right in the eye. And then they're gone, leaving you with a memory that never ever fades. Story 13. All right, I'll just get right into it. I've been turning this over in my head for months now, and I still can't make sense of it. I don't know what I saw, but I know what I felt. And that was a fear so deep and cold, it felt like my bones were freezing from the inside out. This happened back in May of last year. I was 38. I've been fishing Norris Lake my whole life. My dad took me, his dad took him. It's a second home to me. This particular spot, it's a real local secret. You take this old Forestry Service road off the main route, a road that's more pothole than pavement, and you follow it for what feels like forever until it dead ends at a small gravel clearing big enough for maybe 3 cars. From there, a narrow path winds down through a thicket of pine and oak to a rickety wooden dock that's probably older than I am. It's miles from the nearest highway, and on a weeknight, you're almost guaranteed to have the whole cove to yourself. That's how I like it. That night it was a Tuesday. I'd gotten there just as the sun was starting to dip behind the ridges. The air was mild, the kind of warm that sits on your skin without being uncomfortable. But there was a thin fog beginning to ghost over the water. It was dead quiet, the way it only gets way out in the woods. No traffic hum, no distant voices, just the occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface and the sound of my own boots on the old dock planks. I set up my gear on the dock, the familiar routine calming my mind after a long day. I baited my hook, cast my line out into the still, dark water, and sat down on my little folding stool with a sigh. The fog was getting a little thicker, clinging to the surface of the lake and making the far shoreline look fuzzy and indistinct. I remember thinking it was a perfect, peaceful night. I was wrong. The first thing that changed was the smell. It didn't creep in. It just arrived all at once like a physical wall. It was a musky odor, thick and heavy, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something rotten, mixed with the dank smell of old, wet earth. It was so strong it coated the back of my throat, making me want to gag. I actually coughed, waving a hand in front of my face, thinking maybe a skunk had died nearby or something. But this was different. This was animal. But not any animal I knew. It was pungent and wild, and it felt close. I stood up, peering into the woods on my side of the cove. The trees were a solid black wall, and with the fog, I couldn't see more than a dozen feet in. Everything was still, eerily still. The crickets that had been chirping had gone quiet. So had the frogs. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the dock pilings. That's when I felt the first real prickle of unease crawl up my spine. The woods are never that silent. Then the splashes started, not the small random plops of fish. These were heavy, powerful thwacks from the shoreline to my left. It sounded like someone was heaving big rocks into the water. I spun around, my heart starting to thump a little harder in my chest. I couldn't see a thing over there, just the vague shape of the bank swallowed by fog and darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and stupid in the vast quiet. No answer. Just another heavy splash, closer this time, sending a ripple that gently rocked the dock. My fishing line went taut, the bobber dipping under. A bite. I ignored it. All my focus was on the woods now. My mind was racing. Was it kids messing with me? Poachers? But who would be out here on a Tuesday night? And why throw rocks? Then a rock, an actual fist-sized stone, sailed out of the darkness and landed in the water with a loud ker-plunk, not 10 feet from the end of the dock. Water sprayed up, and I flinched back. That was no accident. That was a throw. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't funny. I started reeling in my line, my hands fumbling, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. The smell was getting worse, so thick now I could almost taste it. A foul, earthy taste on my tongue. Another rock hit the water even closer. I could hear it whizzing through the air before it landed. That was it. I wasn't waiting around to see what was next. I yanked my line in, the hook and sinker flying out of the water and smacking against one of the wooden posts. I didn't care. I left it. I grabbed my tackle box in one hand and my stool in the other and started hurrying down the dock towards the shore path. My boots thumped loudly on the wet wood, the sound horribly exposed. The path up from the dock is short, maybe 20 yards, but it's steep and covered in loose gravel. It opens up into the small parking clearing where my beat-up Ford F-150 was waiting, a beautiful, beautiful sight. My truck meant safety. It meant getting the hell out of there. I was halfway up the path, breathing hard more from fear than exertion, when I heard a sound from the tree line to the right of the parking lot. It was a crunching, snapping sound, like someone was stomping through dry brush. I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. I slowly turned my head, and that's when I saw it. It burst from the tree line, not with stealth, but with a violent, crashing urgency. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller, maybe more. It was standing upright on 2 legs, and it was built like a damn bear, but a bear that walked like a man. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, sloping down to powerful, long arms. It was covered head to toe in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear's. It was long, shaggy, and looked almost black in the dim light, wet and matted in places. It didn't pause. It didn't look around. Its head was down, but I could see it had a heavy, sloping brow. It took 2 long, ground-eating strides and planted itself right between me and my truck. It was blocking my path. Deliberately. My brain just short-circuited. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like my mind kept trying to file it under bear or weird guy in a suit, but it was neither. The proportions were all wrong. The way it moved was all wrong. It was too big, too fast, too purposeful. Then it lifted its head and roared. It wasn't a bear's roar. It wasn't a lion's. It was this low, guttural, grating sound that seemed to come from the bottom of its chest. It was a sound of pure, raw aggression. The sound hit me in the gut, a physical blow that stole my breath. The smell washed over me in a fresh, nauseating wave. I was paralyzed, just standing there on the path, staring at this thing that had no business existing. It took a step towards me, and that broke the spell. Pure animal instinct took over. Run. I dropped my tackle box and stool. They clattered to the gravel, but I didn't hear them. I spun around and sprinted back down the path towards the dock. It was the only other direction to go. I heard another roar, this one even louder, more enraged, and then a sound I will never forget. A loud, sharp crack, like a baseball bat hitting a tree. I risked a glance over my shoulder as I stumbled down the path. The creature had swiped a forearm at a young pine tree near the parking lot edge. The tree, which was probably 3 inches thick, snapped in half like a twig. It wasn't a show. It was a demonstration of power, a threat. And then it was coming after me. I hit the dock running, my boots slipping on the damp planks. I couldn't go back to the water. I was trapped. My only thought was a desperate, insane one. Run to the other end of the dock, jump in and try to swim for it. I knew it was a stupid idea. The water was cold, I was in jeans and boots, and whatever that thing was, it was fast. I heard its heavy, pounding footsteps thudding on the gravel path behind me. It was coming fast. I could feel the dock vibrating under its weight. I was almost to the end, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst, my lungs burning. Then I remembered. The dock wasn't the only way out. To the right, just before the dock proper started, there was a narrow, overgrown game trail that cut along the water's edge, connecting back to the main path further down the cove. It was a gamble, a stupid one, but it was my only one. I veered hard right, crashing through a wall of ferns and thorny bushes. Branches scraped at my arms and face, but I didn't feel a thing. I could hear the creature behind me, its footsteps now on the dock. I heard a loud, splintering crack as one of the wooden rail posts gave way. I didn't look back. I just ran, following the faint trail, my chest heaving. I burst out of the thicket and back onto the main gravel path, further up from where I'd started. My truck was now to my left. The path between me and it was clear. I put every ounce of strength I had left into a final desperate sprint. Gravel flew from under my boots. I could hear it behind me, its breath coming in heavy, wet-sounding huffs. It was gaining. My keys. My keys were in my pocket. I fumbled for them as I ran, my fingers slick with sweat. I got them out, the familiar, jagged shape of my truck key in my hand. I reached the driver's side door. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, pulling the door shut with a slam that shook the whole cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. Thump! The whole truck jolted, rocking violently on its shocks. The sound was deafening, a hollow metallic boom from the bed. It had hit the tailgate. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear shift into drive. Wham! Another impact, this one on the driver's side rear quarter panel. The truck shuddered, and I heard metal screech. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't dare. I stomped on the gas. The tires spun, spitting gravel, and then caught, launching the truck forward down the narrow dirt road. I didn't let up on the gas. I fishtailed onto the main forestry road, the truck skidding on the loose surface. As I sped away, the trees whipping past my windows, I heard one last, furious roar from back in the cove. It was distant already, but it was filled with so much rage it made the hairs on my arms stand up. And then it faded, swallowed by the sound of my engine and the wind. I drove for 20 minutes white-knuckled, my whole body trembling, before I even thought to slow down. I had tunnel vision, my heart was still trying to beat its way out of my chest, and that god-awful musky smell was still in my nose, clinging to my clothes. The next day, when the sun was high and bright, I went back with my buddy Mark. I had to see. I had to know I wasn't crazy. The gravel clearing was a mess of scuffed-up impressions, but nothing clear. No defined footprints, just disturbed earth and gravel, like something heavy had been stomping and shifting its weight all over the place. Down at the dock, one of the wooden posts was dented and splintered, with long, deep gouges in the wood. And the smell. It was still there. Fainter but unmistakable, that same heavy, musky stench hanging in the air around the dock. We didn't find anything else. No hair, no clear tracks, no more rocks. Just the evidence of a violent struggle and that lingering smell. The whole thing, from the first weird splash to me speeding away, couldn't have lasted more than 10 minutes. But it changed something in me. I don't fish at night anymore. I don't go to that cove at all. I saw something out there that wasn't supposed to be real, something territorial and powerful and angry, and it saw me. I still dream about the sound of its roar and the way the truck shook when it hit it. I don't know what it was. I just know I barely got away. Story 14. It's taken me months to even think about typing this out. I don't really know why I am, except that maybe getting it out of my head and into words will make it feel less like a fever dream. I've been camping since I was a kid. I'm in my 40s now. I know the woods. I know the sounds, the smells, the way the light falls through the trees at different times of day. I've seen bears, heard coyotes, even stumbled across a moose once up in Maine. I'm not some city slicker who gets spooked by a raccoon rustling in the bushes. But what happened back in May of last year, down near the little river in the Smokies, it rewired something in my brain. I haven't been the same since. My buddy, he's the same. We've been camping together for 20 years. He's the quiet, steady type. Doesn't get excited about much. We don't need to talk a lot out there. We just have a rhythm. We'd driven down on a Thursday, hiked a few miles into a spot we've used before. It's not an official campground, just a flat, clear patch of ground near the river, sheltered by a thick wall of rhododendron. We set up the tent, got a small fire going, cooked some dinner. It was a perfect spring evening. The air was cool but not cold, damp from the river, smelling of wet earth and pine. We sat by the fire for a while, not saying much, just listening to the river gurgle over the rocks. We turned in when it got fully dark, maybe 9 o'clock. I slept okay. The sounds of the forest at night are a lullaby to me. But I woke up just as the sky was starting to turn from black to a deep, bruised blue. Not from a noise, just something, a feeling. That primal itch at the back of your neck that says you're not alone. I lay there in my sleeping bag for a minute, listening. My buddy was still asleep, breathing slow and deep. The river was there, a constant white noise. But there was something else underneath it, a rhythmic soft splashing, not the random plops of fish jumping. This was deliberate. Splash, pause, splash. I nudged my buddy awake. He grunted, but I put a finger to my lips and pointed towards the tent flap, which we'd left open, just a crack for air. He got the message instantly. That's the kind of partnership we have. He sat up, his eyes wide and alert. We both, slowly, silently, shifted onto our knees and peered out through the mesh screen of the tent. The river was about 50 yards away, down a gentle, rocky slope. The first hint of dawn light was just catching the mist rising off the water, making everything look soft and grey. And there, on the gravel bar on the far side, was a shape. At first, my brain tried to file it under bear. It was big and dark, but it was all wrong. It was crouched down at the water's edge, its back to us. It wasn't bulky and round like a bear. It was built. Broad shoulders that tapered to a narrower waist. And it was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing, even crouching, looked like it would tower over me if it stood up. Its hair wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It was a uniform, dark brown, almost black, and looked matted and wet in the damp air. It was fishing. I know how that sounds, but that's what it was doing. It had its arms submerged in the water up past its elbows, its head cocked, totally focused. Then, in a movement that was shockingly fast and fluid, its hand shot out of the water and it stood up slightly, just enough to lift its haul. It was holding a trout, a good-sized one, glistening and flipping in its grip. The thing looked at the fish for a second, then tossed it backwards onto a pile on the gravel behind it. I hadn't even noticed the pile until then. There were already maybe 8 or 10 fish there, a small silvery mound. We didn't move, we didn't breathe, we just watched. The whole scene was so bizarrely normal, so purposeful. It wasn't some monster rampaging, it was working, getting breakfast. The splashing sound was it feeling for fish under the rocks. We could hear its breathing from across the river, a deep, resonant inhale and exhale like a bellows. Underneath that, a low, continuous rumble, like a truck engine idling far away, and the smell. God, the smell. It had been faint when we first woke up, just a musky note in the air, like a wet dog that had rolled in something dead. But now, with the slight breeze coming off the river, it was stronger. A heavy, pungent odor of old sweat, damp fur, and something else. Something wild and gamey that stuck in the back of my throat. We must have watched it for 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. My knees were aching from kneeling on the hard tent floor, but I didn't dare shift my weight. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure the thing would hear it. My buddy's hand was on my shoulder, his grip so tight it was cutting off circulation. I could feel the fine tremble running through his arm. Then, the moment that will be burned into my mind forever. The creature had just caught another fish. It was in the process of standing up to add it to the pile when it froze. Its head, which had been bent over the water, slowly turned. It wasn't looking at the fish anymore. It was looking directly at our tent. I felt my blood turn to ice water. Every hair on my body stood up. It had seen us. There was no doubt. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel the focus of its gaze. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a lock. It didn't snarl or roar. It just rose. It uncoiled from its crouch, and it kept rising. It was so much taller than I had imagined. 7.5 feet, 8, I don't know. It was just massive, a living, breathing wall of muscle and dark hair. It was fully upright, just like a man, but on a scale that was all wrong for the world. It exhaled. It was a cold morning, and its breath plumed out in a massive white cloud. The cloud didn't just drift away, it blasted out, visible and thick. And in that same second, its arm, which was still holding the trout, swung down in a short, brutal arc. It didn't throw the fish. It slapped the surface of the river with its open palm. The sound wasn't a splash. It was a crack, a sharp, percussive bang that echoed off the trees and hit me in the chest. Water didn't just spray up. It erupted in a solid, arcing curtain that glittered in the weak dawn light. It was a display of pure, raw power that was absolutely terrifying. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement. Then it took a step towards us. It moved onto the gravel bar, its feet crunching on the stones. It was coming. Not running, just walking, with a slow, deliberate intent that was 1,000 times more frightening than a charge. That broke the spell. My buddy and I flinched back from the tent flap at the same time, scrambling, falling over each other in a panic. We didn't speak, didn't need to. We just scrambled out of the tent, crawling on our hands and knees, and dove headfirst into the thickest part of the rhododendron bushes behind our campsite. The branches scratched at our faces and hands, but we didn't care. We just pushed ourselves deeper until we were completely hidden, curled up in a small, dark hollow under the tangled canopy of leaves. We lay there, panting, our hearts trying to beat their way out of our chests. I could taste blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my cheek. The smell was overpowering now, that musky animal stench, so thick it felt like I was breathing it into my lungs. We waited for the sound of heavy footsteps, for the tent to be ripped apart, but nothing happened. The only sound was the river and our own ragged breathing. The low rumbling had stopped. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It was a silence with weight to it, a pressing, listening silence. After what felt like an eternity, maybe a minute, maybe 5, I dared to peer out through a tiny gap in the leaves. The creature was still standing on the gravel bar. It was just looking in our direction. It had that fish still in its hand. Then, in a movement that was almost casual, it drew its arm back and hurled the fish. It didn't toss it onto its pile. It threw it sideways, back into the river, with a force that sent it skimming across the surface before it sank. A low rumble started up again, deeper and shorter this time. It wasn't the idle sound from before. It felt like a final grumbled word. Then it turned. It didn't walk back into the trees. It dropped back down into a crouch and loped. The movement was effortless, a powerful, fluid gait that covered ground incredibly fast, and it was silent. I mean, completely silent. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves. 1 second it was there, a massive dark shape moving between the tree trunks, and the next second it was just gone, vanished into the deep shadows of the forest. We didn't move for a long time. We just stayed curled up in the dirt under those bushes, shaking. The sun came up properly, casting long golden beams through the trees, but it didn't feel warm. It felt exposing. We were still listening, waiting for it to come back. Finally, my buddy whispered, his voice hoarse and cracked. "We need to go. Now." We crawled out. Our campsite looked exactly as we'd left it. The tent The cold fire ring, our backpacks leaning against a log, it all looked so normal, so peaceful. It made the whole thing feel even more insane. We didn't talk. We just started packing. Our hands were shaking so bad, it was hard to collapse the tent poles. We didn't fold anything, just stuffed the tent, sleeping bags, everything, into our packs in a tangled mess. We didn't even bother with the straps properly, just shouldered the weight and started walking. We didn't look back at the river. The hike out was a blur of pure adrenaline and fear. Every snap of a twig made us jump. Every shadow in the woods looked like a moving shape. We were both drenched in a cold sweat, our clothes sticking to us. I felt drained, hollowed out, like all the energy and life had been sucked right out of me. My mind was just a loop of that thing rising up, the crack of its hand on the water, the way it looked right at us. We got to the car, threw our packs in the back, and got the hell out of there. We drove for 2 hours before we even said a word. And when we did talk, it wasn't a debate. We both knew. We're both practical guys. We don't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that stuff. But what we saw was a Sasquatch. There's no other word for it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was a living, intelligent animal, and it was letting us know we were in its place. That whole display, catching the fish, building the pile, and then that final aggressive slap and stare. It wasn't random. It was a performance, a warning. It was showing us it was the one in control there. It could have come after us. It could have torn us apart, but it didn't. It just made its point and left. I haven't been camping since. My buddy hasn't either. We talk on the phone sometimes, but we don't really talk about that day. There's nothing more to say. We both lived through it. We both know what we saw. And the feeling it left me with, more than the fear, is this profound sense of smallness. We think we own this world, that we understand it. We don't. There are things out there in the deep, quiet places that we know nothing about. And sometimes if you're in the wrong place at the exact wrong time, one of them might just decide to let you know it's there. Story 15. Okay, I'll post this here because I don't know where else to put it, and I need to get it off my chest. I've been a game warden in western Arkansas for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of things out in these woods, things that most people wouldn't believe, but I always had an explanation for them. A dead animal was just a dead animal. A weird sound was just the wind, or a falling branch. I was good at my job because I understood the woods, or at least I thought I did. That all changed one day in October of 2019. It was a Tuesday, I remember that much. The air had that first real bite of autumn, the kind that makes you glad for a jacket in the morning, but has you sweating by midday. The leaves were just starting to turn, a few splashes of red and yellow in a sea of green. My patrol that day was in a really remote section of the National Forest, a place we don't get to as often as we should. It's a bastard to get into, all steep ridges and thick tangled undergrowth. No proper roads, just a couple of overgrown logging tracks that you need a high-clearance vehicle to even think about navigating. I was in my old Bronco, the one with the lift kit and the winch, because you don't go back in there without an exit strategy. The purpose of the trip was a routine check for poaching. We'd had some scattered reports, nothing concrete, just whispers from a few hunters about hearing shots at night. So I was driving slow, my window down, just listening. The forest was quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but the kind of heavy, waiting quiet that sets your teeth on edge. You know the one. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of my tires crunching over last year's leaves. I came around a bend, and that's when I saw it. The smell hit me first, even before I fully registered what I was looking at. It was a coppery, thick smell, the smell of a slaughterhouse. Not the faint, sweet smell of a week-old carcass, but the sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood. Lots of it. There, in a small clearing maybe 20 yards off the track, was a deer, or what was left of one. It was a full-grown white-tailed buck, or it had been. It was just destroyed. It wasn't just killed, it was torn apart. Its ribs were splayed open like something had just reached in and pulled it in half. The spine was snapped, and one of its hind legs was ripped clean off, lying a good 10 feet away. The force it would have taken to do that. It wasn't from a car, it wasn't from a coyote pack. I've seen bear kills, and even a big black bear doesn't make a mess like this. A bear is messy, but it's efficient. This was rage. This was overwhelming power. I killed the engine and got out, my rifle in my hand without even thinking about it. The silence was absolute now, pressing in on my eardrums. I walked towards the carcass, my boots making too much noise on the dry leaves. The ground around the deer was a churned-up mess of blood-soaked earth and leaves, and there were impressions in the mud. Not tracks, not anything I could identify. They were just deep, indistinct depressions, bigger than my boot, and they were everywhere. It looked like something massive had been pacing around its kill. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I'm a trained professional. I've been in sticky situations before, but this felt different. This felt predatory in a way I couldn't categorize. I was scanning the tree line, the thickets, my head on a swivel. That's when the feeling started, that primal ice water in your veins feeling of being watched. You can dismiss it as paranoia until you feel it for real. It's a physical weight on the back of your neck, a tightening in your gut. I took a few steps back towards my truck, my eyes straining to see into the shadows under the trees. The sun was dappling through the canopy, creating a shifting pattern of light and dark that made everything move. Then I saw it, a shadow that was too solid, a shape that didn't belong. It was deep in the woods, maybe 50 yards away, standing partly behind a thick oak tree. It was massive, tall and incredibly broad across the shoulders. It was just a dark, bipedal shape, but the size of it. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be 1.5 feet, 2 feet taller than me at least. And it was built. Not lanky, but thick, like a powerlifter. It was just standing there, perfectly still. And I absolutely knew that it was looking right at me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't raise my rifle. I didn't even think to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to make a threatening move. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't anything I had a protocol for. I started backing up, slow, one careful step at a time, never taking my eyes off that spot. And as I moved, it moved. It didn't step out. It just shifted its position, paralleling me, keeping the same distance, staying in the deep shadows. I could see the sheer bulk of it as it moved, a fluid, powerful motion that was completely silent. There was no crackle of twigs, no rustle of leaves. Nothing. The fear was a cold stone in my stomach now. This was its kill. I was an intruder. I'd seen enough nature documentaries to know how that usually ends. I was almost to my truck, my hand fumbling behind me for the door handle when it made a sound. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream. It was a deep, guttural growl that dropped into a sharp, percussive bark. The sound didn't just hit my ears, it vibrated in my chest. I felt it in my teeth. It was a sound of pure, raw warning, and it was the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my life. Before the echo had even died, there was a sharp crack that split the air, loud as a gunshot. The thing, in one blindingly fast motion, had snatched a broken limb off the ground, a limb as thick as my forearm, and had slammed it against the trunk of the oak tree it was standing near. The wood splintered, and the piece in its hand shattered. It wasn't just hitting the tree, it was demonstrating. It was showing me exactly what it could do. The message was crystal clear: leave now. That broke my paralysis. I wrenched the Bronco's door open, threw my rifle onto the passenger seat, and scrambled in. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't look back. I just slammed the truck into gear, spun it around in a cloud of dust and dead leaves, and gunned it down that logging track as fast as I dared. I didn't stop looking in the rearview mirror until I was miles away, back on a paved road. I drove straight to the district station. My partner, Mark, was there, and he took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. I tried to explain it, my words tumbling out too fast. The destroyed deer, the smell, the size of the thing, the sound, the tree. I could hear how crazy it sounded even to me. But Mark's known me for 15 years. He saw that I was genuinely spooked, that this wasn't some rookie's imagination. We geared up and went back out there later that afternoon. 2 of us, in a bigger truck, with more firepower. The silence was still there when we arrived. The clearing was different. The deer carcass was gone. Not eaten, not dragged away by scavengers. Gone. A large portion of it had just been removed. The leg that was lying 10 feet away was also gone. The blood-soaked ground was still there, a dark, ugly stain, but the main event had vanished. The disturbances on the ground were even more pronounced, like whatever had been there had gotten more agitated after I left. But there were still no clear tracks, nothing with a defined shape, no claw marks, no toe impressions, just those deep, powerful depressions in the earth. We searched the perimeter, our rifles held tight. We found the tree, the one it had struck. There was a fresh white gash in the bark about 7 feet off the ground, and splinters of wood were scattered around the base. It was real. It had all been real. We didn't find anything else. No hair, no scat, no other evidence. We filed a report, of course. It's in the system somewhere, probably under unidentified animal incident or something equally useless. I never saw that thing again. I still do my job, but I don't go into that particular drainage alone anymore. I carry a heavier sidearm now, a 45 instead of my old 9mm. It's probably useless against something that big, but it makes me feel a little less naked out there. That day stuck with me. It changed the woods for me. I used to see them as a place I understood, a system with rules. Now I know there are things in the deep, dark parts of this state, things that don't follow any rules I know, things that science hasn't gotten around to cataloging yet, and one of them knows my face. I felt its eyes on me, I heard its voice in my chest, and I saw the casual, terrifying power in its warning. I was in its world just for a few minutes, and that was enough. More than enough. I still dream about that sound sometimes, that deep growl bark, and I wake up with my heart hammering, the coppery smell of blood stuck in my nose. Story 16. So. It was July of 2010, and I was at Washington County Lake, the one south of Nashville, Illinois. I'd been there 100 times before, catfishing. That's what I was there for. You go out late, you stay late. That's when the big flatheads are moving. I had my little aluminum boat, a 12-footer with a small electric trolling motor, and I was set up in my usual spot, a quiet cove on the far side of the lake away from the main boat ramp. The sun had been down for a couple of hours. It was that deep, dark kind of summer night, not a cloud in the sky, so the stars and the moon were out, giving everything a silvery, washed-out look. It was quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. Just the hum of the trolling motor and the occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface way out in the middle. I had a couple lines out, sitting back in my chair, just waiting. I remember the air was thick and humid, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back even when you're not moving. That's when I first heard it. It was a heavy, rhythmic stomp, 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 coming from the woods on the shoreline to my left. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, maybe 100 yards into the tree line. I sat up straight, my hand going to the cooler beside me out of instinct, like I was going to grab a beer, but I just left it there. I listened. The sound stopped. I shrugged it off. Deer. Had to be a big buck, maybe, walking through the dry leaves and undergrowth. It's a big woods out there. I settled back down, telling myself it was nothing. But then, about 10 or 15 minutes later, I heard it again. Same thing. Stomp, stomp, stomp. A slow, deliberate pace. Heavy. Too heavy for a deer. The sound carried way too well over the water. This time, a little prickle went up the back of my neck. I turned my headlight, a big spotlight I keep in the boat for navigating, towards the shore. I swept the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just a wall of dark trunks and shadows that swallowed the light. I clicked it off. The silence felt heavier now. I tried to get back into the rhythm of fishing, checking my lines, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I was listening. Every little sound from the woods made me jump. A twig snap sounded like a gunshot. I kept looking over my shoulder at the shoreline. The feeling was starting to settle in my gut, that cold, tight feeling you get when you know you're not alone, when something isn't right. Then it happened. The sound that made all the hair on my arms stand straight up. From directly behind my boat, maybe 30 feet out in the water, there was a huge, tremendous splash. It wasn't a fish. I've heard big fish jump. This was different. This was a massive, singular, explosive sound, like someone had thrown a cinder block into the lake. A huge plume of water shot up, and the wake from it rocked my little aluminum boat so hard I had to grab the sides to keep from tipping over. Water droplets rained down on me. My heart just about exploded in my chest. I fumbled for the spotlight, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I swung the beam out over the water where the splash had been. Nothing. Just the rings on the water, spreading out, getting wider and wider. There was nothing out there, no log, no animal, nothing. It was just black, empty water. That was it for me. I was done. Fishing was the last thing on my mind. All I wanted was to be back at my truck, on the road, gone. I yanked my lines in, not even caring about the bait or the rigs, just coiling them up in a messy pile on the floor of the boat. My hands were trembling, and I kept glancing back at the spot where the splash happened. The silence was back, but now it felt menacing, like it was waiting. I got the trolling motor going and pointed the bow towards the main dock. It was about 3/4 of a mile away, a straight shot across the open water. I cranked the motor to its highest speed, which isn't fast, maybe a slow jogging pace. The little electric motor whined in the quiet. I hadn't been moving for more than a minute when I heard the stomping start again. This time it was keeping pace with me. It was moving along the tree line parallel to the shore, matching my speed. Stomp, stomp, stomp. I could hear branches snapping, the crunch of heavy feet on the forest floor. I didn't need the spotlight. I knew what I'd see, or I knew I wouldn't see anything. I just stared at the shoreline, a dark, jagged line against the slightly less dark sky. I could hear it, this thing, this presence moving through the woods, keeping up with me as I puttered across the lake. I've never felt so small, so exposed. I was in the middle of this lake, in this flimsy metal boat, and something massive and unseen was tracking me from the shadows. I started talking to myself, just whispering, come on, just get to the dock, just get to the truck. My mouth was dry as dust. Every few seconds I'd look back, expecting to see something in the water behind me, but there was only my own wake. That 3/4 mile felt like it took an hour. The whole time, the stomping never stopped. It never got closer, but it never fell behind. It was just there, a constant heavy reminder that I was being hunted, or if not hunted, then definitely followed, watched. Finally, I saw the outline of the wooden dock up ahead. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I aimed straight for it, not even bothering with a gentle approach. I bumped hard against the tires hanging off the side, the whole boat shuddering. I scrambled out, my legs wobbly, not even tying the boat off. I just grabbed my cooler and my tackle box and started half walking, half running up the gravel path towards the parking lot where my truck was. The parking lot was just a gravel clearing with a few old light poles that didn't work. My truck was the only vehicle there. As soon as I left the cover of the trees near the dock, the stomping sound stopped. The woods went dead silent again. It was almost worse. The absence of sound was somehow louder, more terrifying. It meant it was still there, but it had stopped moving. It was just waiting and watching from the edge of the trees. I was fumbling for my keys, my hands so slick with sweat I could barely get a grip on them. I finally got them out, the jangling of the metal way too loud in the silence. I was maybe 20 feet from my truck, almost to the driver's side door, when I heard it. A low, guttural grunt. It came from the tree line, right where the path from the dock met the parking lot. It wasn't a bear. I've heard bears. This was deeper, heavier, with a resonance that I felt in my bones. It was a sound of pure power. I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. I slowly turned my head, and I saw the eyes. My truck was old, and I'd left the headlights on by accident when I'd parked earlier. The beams were cutting two paths through the dark, illuminating the first few rows of trees. And there, just at the edge of the light, maybe 50 feet away, were two eyes. They were huge, and they were a bright, piercing yellow, reflecting the headlights back at me. They were high up, way too high. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things were a good 2 feet above where my head would be. They were just floating there in the darkness, unblinking. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I just stared at those two yellow eyes, and they stared right back at me. I could feel the intelligence in that stare. It wasn't the dumb curiosity of a deer. This was a knowing, a calculating look. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs were made of stone. Then the grunt came again, lower this time, more of a rumble. That broke the spell. I lunged for my truck door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I didn't even think about the boat. I threw it into reverse, my tires spinning in the gravel, and then slammed it into drive. I stomped on the gas, and the truck shot forward, heading for the one-lane dirt road that led out to the main highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The parking lot was empty. Those yellow eyes were gone. For a second, a tiny, desperate part of me thought maybe I'd imagined it all, the stress, the late night, my mind playing tricks. That's when I heard the first bang. It was a heavy metallic thump against the back of my boat, which was still hitched to the trailer. I flinched, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I looked in the mirror again. Nothing, just the dark outline of the boat behind me. Then came the second bang. This one was different. It was against the truck itself, on the passenger side, right behind the cab. It was so hard, it felt like the whole truck shivered. It wasn't a rock. It was a solid, powerful impact. My eyes shot back to the rearview mirror, and I saw it. For a split second, illuminated by my own red brake lights and the dim glow of the trailer's running lights, I saw a massive, dark figure. It was huge, broader than a man, and covered in what looked like shaggy dark hair or fur. It was running, not on all fours but upright on two legs, with a powerful loping gait that was closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. It was a silhouette of pure, raw power, and it was chasing my truck. I screamed. I don't even know what I screamed, just a raw, panicked noise ripped from my throat. I stomped the gas pedal to the floor. The old truck's engine roared, and we picked up speed down the bumpy dirt road. I saw it come up alongside the passenger side in the mirror, a monstrous shadow keeping pace with me. Then it lunged. The third impact was the worst. It wasn't a bang. It was a deafening, crushing crunch of metal. The whole truck jolted violently to the left, the steering wheel wrenching in my hands. I fought to keep it on the road, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I dared one more look in the side mirror. I saw a huge, dark arm, thick as a small tree trunk, pull back from the passenger side door, and right there in the dim light I saw the dent. A massive fist-shaped impression in the metal, right below the window. It was still there. It was still chasing me. I didn't look back again. I just drove, my knuckles white on the wheel, my foot glued to the accelerator. I didn't slow down until my tires hit the smooth pavement of the state highway a mile away. I drove another 10 miles before I even thought about slowing down, my entire body trembling, sweat pouring down my face. When I finally got the nerve to pull over at a well-lit gas station, I got out and looked at my truck. The passenger side door was destroyed. There was a huge, deep dent, and the metal was crumpled inwards. It looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. I just stood there staring at it, feeling sick. I touched the cold, twisted metal. It was real. All of it was real. I went back at first light with my shotgun on the seat beside me. The morning was bright and peaceful, birds chirping, the lake calm and beautiful. There was nothing at the parking lot, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing. My boat was still at the dock, untied, just drifting. I looked at the dirt road where it had happened. No signs, nothing. I never found an explanation. I don't talk about it much because people either don't believe you or they give you that look. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know what followed me for 3/4 of a mile through the woods, and I know what put that dent in my truck door with its bare hands. I still fish. I love it. But I never, ever go alone. And I'm always off the water before the sun even thinks about going down. Whatever that was, it's still out there. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear that heavy, rhythmic stomping, and I see those 2 yellow eyes floating in the dark, watching me. Story 17. I was in my old car, a 1968 Chevy El Camino that my dad had helped me restore. It was a beast, rusted in spots, but it ran smooth and I loved that thing. The seats were cracked vinyl, and the smell of old oil and dust hung in the air, mixed with the cool night breeze coming through the window I'd cracked open. I'd been driving for hours, and my back was starting to ache from sitting too long. The radio was on, but it was mostly static up in the mountains, so I'd given up and turned it off, leaving me with just the sound of the tires on asphalt and the wind whistling past. It was around midnight, and I was on Interstate 5, heading north through Siskiyou Summit. That stretch of road is winding and steep, with dense forests on either side that feel like they go on forever. The air was chilly, typical for that area even in summer, and I remember shivering a little, wishing I'd brought a thicker jacket. The moon was out, but it was partly covered by clouds, so the road was mostly dark except for my headlights cutting through the black. I'd driven this route a few times before, but never this late, and there was something eerie about it. Like the world had gone quiet, and I was the only one left awake. I was rounding a sharp corner, my hands tight on the steering wheel, when I saw something move in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker or someone who'd broken down. My heart jumped into my throat, and I slammed on the brakes without even thinking. The tires screeched, and the El Camino swerved, fishtailing a bit before I managed to straighten out and come to a stop right in the middle of the lane. I was shaking, my breath coming in short gasps, and I just sat there for a second trying to process what I'd seen. That's when I got a clear look. It wasn't a person, it was something else. It had just jumped over the center divider like it was crossing the road, and now it was standing maybe 20 feet in front of my car. I remember the distance because it felt so close. Close enough that I could see every detail in the dim light from my headlights. This thing was huge, over 7 feet tall, and built like a basketball player, but way more muscular, like one of those old lumberjack statues you see, Paul Bunyan, kind of solid. Its back was hunched, and its arms were so long they almost dragged on the ground. It was covered in hair, medium dark brown, about 3 inches long, and it was everywhere, like a thick coat. I couldn't see any skin at all. It was like the hair was part of it, blending into itself. The eyes were dark, almost black, and they seemed to sink into the fur, making it hard to tell where they began and ended. It reminded me of that creature from Harry and the Hendersons, which I'd seen as a kid. But this was real, right in front of me. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. I wasn't scared at first, more like stunned, curious. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't have arms that long. This thing was upright on 2 legs, and it moved with a kind of grace that didn't match its size. It didn't make a sound, and neither did I. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a steady thump, thump, thump that seemed too loud for the silence around us. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, but also a faint, musky odor I couldn't place, like wet dog, but stronger, more wild. The creature didn't seem aggressive. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly like it was studying me too. Its eyes were intelligent, not blank like an animal's, and I got the sense that it was as curious about me as I was about it. It took a step back, then forward again, like it was hesitant, unsure of what to do. I remember my hands were still gripping the wheel, my knuckles white, and I could feel the cold sweat on my palms. My legs felt weak, like jelly, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Part of me wanted to get out of the car, to get a closer look, but another part was frozen in place. Then the terror hit me, not because it was threatening me. It never raised its arms or growled or anything, but because I realized how close I'd come to hitting it. If I'd been going any faster, or if I'd swerved differently, I could have plowed right into it. And the sheer size of it. I mean, this thing was powerful. I could see the muscles rippling under that thick coat, and it made me feel small, vulnerable. My stomach tightened, and I had this sudden urge to just drive away, to put as much distance between us as possible. But I couldn't move. I was locked in that moment, watching it, and it watching me. The silence was deafening. No cars passed us. It was like the world had stopped. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves in the trees, and once a distant owl hoot, but otherwise it was just us. The creature's breath misted in the cool air, little puffs of white that vanished quickly. Its eyes never left mine, and I swear it felt like it was trying to communicate something, though I don't know what. There was a sadness in its gaze, or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. But I felt a connection, however brief, like we were two beings from different worlds, sharing a single moment in time. After what must have been only a minute or two, though it felt like hours, it finally moved. It took a few long, deliberate steps, its feet making almost no sound on the pavement. Each step was slow, measured, like it was being careful not to startle me. Then it reached the side of the road and disappeared into the trees. Just like that, it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next it had melted into the darkness, and I was left alone, my heart still racing. I sat there for another minute, maybe more, just staring at the spot where it had been. My mind was reeling. What the hell was that? Bigfoot? Sasquatch? I'd heard stories, of course, but I never put much stock in them. Now I wasn't so sure. I thought about turning the car around, maybe trying to follow it, but that seemed stupid, dangerous even. Then a darker thought crossed my mind. I could run it over, for science, or proof, or whatever. I had the El Camino. It was sturdy, could probably handle it, but as soon as I thought it, I felt sick. This thing hadn't hurt me. It had just been there, living its life. Who was I to interfere? So I let the idea go. I took a deep breath, my hands still shaking, and put the car back in drive. I pulled away slowly, my eyes darting to the woods, half expecting to see it again. But there was nothing, just the dark trees and the road ahead. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept replaying the encounter in my head over and over, the way it moved, the way it looked at me. I felt changed, like something inside me had shifted. I didn't tell anyone when I got home. My parents would have thought I was crazy. But I've carried it with me ever since. That was it. One night, one encounter, and I've never been able to explain it. Sometimes I wonder if it was real, or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget it. Story 18. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before. I usually just read these stories and move on, but something happened a while back that I can't shake. I need to get it out there, and maybe someone else has heard something similar. I'm not saying I know what it was, I don't. But I know what I heard, and my girlfriend heard it too. We were both there. It was late September, maybe 3 years ago now. We were camping in this pretty remote part of the Cascades in Washington. My girlfriend, she's a wildlife biologist. She spent years in the field, knows animal calls the way I know the sounds my old truck makes. Me, I've been camping since I was a kid. My dad took me all over. Glacier National Park, the Yukon, even Denali a couple times. I'm not some rookie who spooks at a coyote yipping. That's why this whole thing messes with me so much. We'd set up camp in this small clearing by a creek. It was a good spot, flat ground, plenty of dry wood. We'd had a fire, cooked dinner, the whole deal. It was a clear, cold night, the kind where the stars are so bright you feel like you could reach up and touch them. We went to bed around 10. Everything was normal, quiet. The kind of quiet you only get miles from the nearest road. I was dead asleep. The kind of sleep where you don't even dream. Then I wasn't. It was between 3 and 3:30 in the morning. I know because the first thing I did when my brain started working again was fumble for my watch on the little crate we use as a bedside table. I didn't wake up slowly. I was just awake, and my chest felt weird, like a low hum, a vibration right in my sternum. I thought maybe it was a dream or some kind of sleep paralysis. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound that started outside and came in. It felt like it started inside my own ribs and then poured out into the world. A howl. But that word doesn't do it justice. It was a deep, guttural roar that climbed into a high, shrieking howl before dropping back down into this moan, a death moan. It was loud, unbelievably loud. It wasn't far away. It felt like it was right at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50, 60 yards from our tent. The vibration in my chest wasn't my imagination. The sound was so low and powerful, it was physically shaking me. The air in the tent felt thick with it. Next to me, my girlfriend jerked upright. I heard her sharp intake of breath. In the pitch black of the tent, I couldn't see her face, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. She's the calm one, the logical one. When a bear wandered into camp once in Montana, she just talked to it calmly while backing away. Now, her hand shot out and clamped onto my arm. Her grip was vice-tight. "What is that?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, strained. I couldn't answer. My throat was locked shut. We just sat there, frozen, listening. The sound lasted for what felt like a full minute, but my rational mind later clocked it at about 10 seconds. It was a long 10 seconds. It wasn't just a noise. It had layers. There was the deep roar, a higher-pitched, almost screeching element that made my teeth ache, and underneath it all, this palpable, vibrating resonance that I felt in my bones more than I heard with my ears. It was a mix of things I could almost place: a howler monkey's depth, a bear's angry bellow, the final wet groan of a dying animal, but blended into something I had no reference for. It was wrong. It was ancient. It felt primal in a way that nothing I'd ever experienced had. And then it stopped. The silence that crashed down was almost as heavy as the sound. It was a thick, pressing silence. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the slight rustle of the trees, the creek, were all gone. Everything was just dead. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just sat there in the dark, holding on to each other, listening to that absolute nothing. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. I was breathing in shallow, quiet gasps, trying to make no sound. Then, after a few minutes, maybe 2, maybe 3, it came again. The second one was identical to the first, but it felt closer. The vibration was stronger. The high-pitched part of the howl seemed to scrape directly against my spine. My girlfriend flinched so hard she almost pulled me over. We both instinctively ducked lower in the sleeping bag, as if that would help. It went on like that, a burst of that horrifying, chest-shaking vocalization, lasting around 10 seconds, then a few minutes of that crushing, watchful silence, then another one, and another. Each time it felt like it was building, not in volume necessarily, but in intensity, in purpose. It didn't sound random, it sounded like a declaration or a challenge. I lost count after 4 or 5. My mind was just a frantic loop of what is that, what is that, what is that? I kept running through the catalogue of North American animals in my head. Bull elk? No. Their bugle is shrill and whistling, not this deep, multi-toned roar. Mountain lion. Their scream is hair-raising, but it's higher, more like a woman's scream. This was heavier. Bear? A bear's roar is a blunt, angry sound. This had a complexity to it, a lingering, intelligent modulation that a bear's roar doesn't have. Wolf? Absolutely not. This was orders of magnitude louder and deeper than any wolf howl. This was something else. My girlfriend, her voice barely a breath in my ear, confirmed it. I don't know what that is. The fear in her whisper was 1,000 times more terrifying than the sound itself. Because if she didn't know, with her PhD and her years tracking wolves in Minnesota and studying grizzlies in Alaska, then we were in uncharted territory. The last howl was the worst. It seemed to peak, the high-end screech becoming almost metallic, before it cut off abruptly. And then, nothing. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. It felt like whatever had been making that sound was now just standing there, listening, waiting. We didn't move for what felt like an hour. We just sat, huddled together in the dark. My legs were cramping. I had to pee desperately, but there was no way I was unzipping that tent flap. The thought of making any noise, of exposing even a sliver of myself to whatever was out there in that silent darkness was unthinkable. Slowly, infinitesimally slowly, the black inside the tent began to turn to gray. Dawn was coming. The first bird chirped, a tiny, brave sound in the immense quiet. Then another. The world was starting up again. The normal sounds of the forest were tentatively returning, as if they too had been hiding. When it was light enough to see the shapes of the trees outside, I finally moved. My body was stiff and cold. I carefully, so carefully, unzipped the tent door just a few inches and peered out. The clearing looked exactly as it had the night before. Our fire pit was a circle of grey ash. Our packs were leaning against a log. The creek bubbled peacefully. There were no giant footprints, no broken trees, nothing out of place. It was perfectly, mundanely normal, and that was almost more disturbing than if there had been wreckage. We packed up camp in record time, not speaking much, just throwing everything into the truck in a frantic, clumsy hurry. We both kept scanning the tree line. The hairs on the back of my neck wouldn't lie down. We didn't make coffee. We didn't eat breakfast. We just got in the truck, locked the doors, and I started the engine. The sound of it was obscenely loud in the morning calm. The drive back to the main road was tense. We were both staring out the windows into the deep woods. It was only when we were on the paved highway with other cars around us that I felt like I could finally take a full breath. The first thing we did when we got cell service was pull over. My girlfriend was already on her phone, searching through university sound archives, wildlife databases, everything she had access to. We listened to recordings of elk, moose, cougars, bears, even weird stuff like foxes screaming. Nothing matched. Nothing even came close to the depth and that horrible, vibrating quality. We were both quiet, frustrated. She was chewing on her thumbnail, a nervous habit she hasn't had since grad school. It's just not anything, she said, her voice tired. On a whim, I don't even know why, I typed unidentified animal howl recording into the search bar. One of the first results was from a cryptozoology forum. I almost clicked away, but then I saw the title, Sasquatch Vocalizations, Clear Recording. I looked at my girlfriend. She gave a slight skeptical shrug, but her eyes were curious. I clicked the link. There was a low-quality video with a black screen. I turned up the volume on my phone, and then it played. It was the same sound, not similar, the exact same progression from that deep, chest-rattling roar up into that piercing, shrieking howl and back down into that guttural, moaning finish. The same duration. The same terrifying, resonant vibration that you could feel even through my phone's tiny speaker. My stomach dropped. My skin went cold. We just sat there in the truck, on the side of the highway, listening to it on a loop. We didn't say anything for a long time. My girlfriend, the scientist, the skeptic, just stared at my phone, her face pale. "Well," she finally said, her voice quiet. That's what we heard. We ended up filing a report with some Bigfoot research group she found online. Not because we suddenly believed in forest giants, but because what else could we do? The evidence, as flimsy as it was right there. The sound was a perfect match. We didn't claim to have seen anything. We just reported what we heard. I've tried to rationalize it. A rare bear vocalization, a known animal making a sound under strange atmospheric conditions that distorted it. But the recording haunts me. The sheer primal terror of that night haunts me. It opened a door in my mind to a possibility I'd always dismissed. My grandpa used to tell us kids stories about the stick Indians and giants that lived in the deep woods. We laughed. We thought they were just stories. I don't laugh anymore. I don't know what was out there with us that night. I just know that it was real, it was close, and it was something I hope to never ever hear again. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind is just right, I find myself listening, my heart starting to pound all over again, waiting for a sound I know I'll recognize.